Check out The Projection Booth, Wednesdays on iTunes and ChristopherMedia.net. Christopher Media, let's make some noise.
Here, in a world where the sun burns cold, and the wind blows colder, a visitor has come. But not by herself.
It started.
Come on!
The suspense is back.
And we have no weapons of any kind?
The fear is back.
Ah! Don't look back, dude! Run as fast as you can!
And most of all, the bitch is back. Alien 3.
This is Rumor Control. You are now in the projection booth, and I am your host, Mike White. We are joined by Mr. Rob St. Mary.
Double Y Ask Why.
Also with us this week is the prisoner of Subblock 1138, Mr. Brad Jones.
Hey, I'm a prisoner.
This week we are talking about the 1992 film Alien 3, the third in the Alien franchise, thus the name, and the feature film debut of David Fincher. Alien 3 stars Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley, Charles Dutton as Dylan, and Charles Dance as Clemens. The film is set on the prison colony planet of Fiorina, where the double Y chromosome prisoners lead something of a monk-like existence with shaved heads and a penchant for spouting spiritual claptrap. Brad, as our guest, when was the first time you saw Alien 3, and what did you think?
The first time I saw Alien 3 was when I saw it in the theater. I was 10. No, I was 11. I was 11 years old, and it was the first Alien movie I saw.
How'd that work out for you?
Well, I had nothing to compare it to, so there was that. I knew with the series, I didn't go into it not knowing anything about the other movies or anything like that. It really was a case of it's Alien 3. My mom really wanted to see it. She had no problem with me seeing it. I just really simply hadn't seen the other two movies at the time, but I knew of them. I knew the chest bursting scene and aliens and all of that. I just hadn't watched the other two, so I went to go see the third one with her. And being big into slasher movies at the time, I remember thinking it was fine. Like, I don't remember sitting there as an 11-year-old kid with any of the criticisms of the movie that I necessarily have now. I just remember being as a kid like, it's Sigourney Weaver chasing an alien through some dark hallways and there's some blood and some gore going on. Right on. 11-year-old kid thinks this is entertaining. And then it was not long after that I saw the other two movies, and which were wildly better than Alien 3. When I rewatched it for the show today, honestly, that was rewatching it in order to do the podcast might be the first time I've seen it all the way through since I was probably a teenager, like early teens maybe.
So, Rob, when was the first time you saw Alien 3?
The show.
What'd you think?
You know, having not seen Alien 2, cue the scary music. It wasn't bad for what it is. I watched the theatrical cut, and I thought, it's perfectly serviceable. Not having too much of an emotional tie to the second film going into the third film, it's kind of interesting. I think some of the stuff looks dated, but then again, it was made 23 years ago, so anything made 23 years ago probably looks dated. But overall, it's not too bad. Is it something I'm probably going to watch again? Maybe not in a while.
Now, when you say you saw the theatrical cut, how does your movie start?
Let's see. Text of crash on screen, and then these guys open an escape pod, and then it's Ripley, the 12-year-old girl, and the leftover remains of the Lance Henriksen character being taken into this medical place.
And so when there is an alien that appears, does it come out of a dog or an ox?
I think it comes out of a dog.
Okay, yes, you definitely saw the theatrical version.
Same. Yeah. That was the same that I watched too.
I have seen, I don't know how many countless cuts of this film now, between the fan edits that are now widely available, through the work print that was available on the bootleg circuit years ago, and through the what they call the assembly cut that is available on the Alien Quadrilogy, and then I think there's even a different cut that is on the Blu-ray box set. And I saw the original back in 1992. Unlike you, Brad, I had seen, I think, 1 and 2 going into this. Definitely I had seen 2, and I had seen 2 a lot. I actually saw 2 kind of like you. I saw that at the theater with my mom back in 1986 when that thing came out. Alien 3, oh man, was I disappointed. I was severely disappointed. But I was so irked by this that Alien 3 has kind of become an obsession for me over the years, because I couldn't figure out how this movie got to be so bad. And I think what really prompted me to start researching this was seeing other films by David Fincher, seeing a film like Fight Club and saying, oh my God, this is awesome. This is a tremendous film. How did this guy make that piece of shit Alien 3 movie? Only to start doing research and find out, oh, he kind of got fucked in the ass while he was making this movie, not realizing just the extent of the skullduggery and the shenanigans that were going on with the producers and the studio and all of this kind of stuff. And yeah, so there's a whole raft of behind the scenes things that we'll be talking about as we go through this episode. But let's talk about the movie, and I guess let's focus on this theatrical cut, because that's what people saw in 1992. And Rob, I have to say, I'm so fucking shocked that you've never seen Aliens. That is just amazing. How have you avoided over the years?
I have no idea. I remember when it came out in 1986, I think I was, 8 years old, and I remember the advertising for it, and I remember some kids who were interested in seeing it. But to be honest, I was even late getting to the first Alien film, so I didn't see that until years later on home video. So it just happens to be kind of the way things worked out, and for some reason I just never saw the second one. Yeah, so it's either that or I did see it at some point and I just don't remember it. So like I said, the jump from going from the first film to the third film was like, okay, it works.
Oh, yeah.
It's not that crazy of a jump. I mean, I think a lot of the problems that I read online from people is that it's such a jump from the second to the third one in terms of a lot of stuff that's in there that people were upset that they either got rid of or they changed or whatever.
Well, I like the way that you describe who else is in that escape pod with her. The little girl and the robot. I mean, I don't even think that you mentioned Hicks at all. And those characters became so meaningful to anybody who saw the second Alien film that their death within the opening credits of the third Alien film is just one of the biggest slaps in the face that you possibly can get. It's like trying to save the princess through the entire first film only to have the princess killed by an errant dragon within the first 2 minutes, and then that's it. And you don't see the death. There's no emotion attached to it except for a little bit afterwards, and that's it. I mean, Ripley, she's affected a little bit, but maybe half hour in, you can't even tell that Newt or Hicks was even around. And it's just like, wow, that's it, huh? That's all you're going to do? So I can see where you're coming from as far as 1 to 3. And then, Brad, you having this background of not seeing 1 or 2. Yeah. When you went back and you watched 1 and 2, what was kind of your reappraisal of 3 then?
When I saw the third one in the theater, I mean, I knew the context of who Hicks and Newt were because I had known enough about the second one from advertising or even my mom telling me what some stuff that happened before we had gone to go see part 3. So then in going back and watching it, I'm of kind of a few different minds about it. One of which is less being pissed off that they were killed off, and more kind of like, well, that's kind of ballsy. Like I'm kind of that mind of it a little bit. Like, wow, to like just kill them off rather gruesomely, and then this pretty dark kind of autopsy sequence, which is even more graphic in the other cut of the movie. That's pretty dark and ballsy and not entirely predictable that would happen. Like, I'm kind of a mind about that. I'm like, you don't see that very much in terms of sequels and with some beloved characters like that. Then on the other hand, like you just mentioned, with this all being shown within the opening credits, with opening credits that were incredibly shoddy. Like this opening credit sequence where it's one of those opening credit sequences where it screams of they're inserting about 20 minutes worth of like deleted sequences into 2 minutes of opening credits, and then just randomly cutting to the stars and the name and like starring Sigourney Weaver and stuff like that, then cutting back to the ship, then cutting back to the credits, back to the ship. Like, oh my God, just freaking pick somewhere, please. I am getting whiplash watching these credits. But then it's exactly what I'm in total agreement with what you said, where if you're going to do this, if you're going to kill off Hicks and you're going to kill off Newt, these two great characters, and you really got to drive home some kind of emotional impact that it has. And in that autopsy scene, there's emotion there from Ripley when that's happening, which why wouldn't there be? She's looking at the kid's dead body, you know. There's emotion in that scene, and that's it. And that's totally it. Like, if you're going to kill them off, do something really hardcore with that, but they don't. They're just like, yeah, they're dead, Ripley is sad, and the rest of it is just Ripley dealing with the prison planet.
I mean, you can do a Psycho. You can have your Marion Crane there for the first 20 minutes and then kill her off. You know, imagine the impact of that.
Oh, yeah.
Newt and Hicks, they're on this prison planet or wherever you want to set this thing. And, man, within the first 20 minutes, they die, and now it's up to Ripley to save the day again. That would just tear the heart out of you, man.
Like Maniac Cop 2.
There's that whole thing, you know, of Alfred Hitchcock, like, you know, you will not be admitted after the first 20 minutes of the film, or you won't be admitted late into the movie. It's like, yeah, if you miss those opening credits, you are effed. You're going to come in there and be like, what is going on? What happened to the other people? Why does she have a shaved head? I don't understand. Why does everybody have a shaved head? And at that point that you're talking about with Ripley having this emotional moment of the autopsy, I mean, at that point, Ripley hasn't been on screen a whole lot, and my emotional weight is really kind of been shifted over to this Charles Dance character. And there are times in the movie where I'm wondering if he's the protagonist more than she's the protagonist, because so much of this is about him and his backstory, his relationship with this prison warden, and just, you know, you get a lot of Charles Dance in this movie.
Charles Dance, best character in the movie.
Yeah, and then he dies. Spoilers. He dies, and now you have the emotional weight a little bit more, but then also you're kind of untethered. It's like, well, what just happened to my, for all intents and purposes, my main character? Yeah. And in the reassembly cut, it's even worse because he's the first character you see on screen, really, and you follow him as he saves Ripley. He's the prince coming in and saving the damsel in distress in that case.
When Charles Dance dies in this movie, I remember this from 92. That was where my mom totally gave up on this movie. When Charles Dance dies, you are totally right. Like, it reminded me even of seeing Alien Resurrection for the first time with the Michael Wincott character.
Yes.
It is exactly the same thing. Here we have probably the best character in the movie and is killed off. Rather, I think Wincott was killed off even quicker, but Dance at least made it to about, I think I checked it when I was watching earlier, and he croaks it about like at the 50-minute point or something like that. And and for the rest of that time, I am kind of like just sort of waiting for it to end because I like Charles Dance and Ripley together. I like the backstory. They spent so much time giving you this backstory on Charles Dance, and then just gone.
And then I expect maybe Charles Dutton is going to kind of come in as, like, take over that. But Dutton is a non-character. I mean, you want to know more about this character, especially the line where he's like,
I'm a murderer and rapist of women.
And now he's out here, he's trying to make amends, he's trying to be better, and you know that Charles Dutton has, he's been in prison in real life. I don't think it was for the murder and rape of women, but I could be wrong, whatever. But you know that Charles Dutton, the actor, has gravitas. You know that he can pull off roles like this, and he just doesn't have anything. He doesn't do anything. He's just there. Just another shaved head guy who looks like he could be interesting, but he just swept under the rug.
He's not. And then he has, and I know I'm totally jumping ahead with what I'm about to say, but even this sacrifice that he makes at the end of the movie makes no sense.
Both of them kind of feel stock to me, and that was one of the things, like I said, about the film, where I was like, it's okay. I actually felt that the Charles Dance character of Clemens, actually, as I was watching it, and there's this whole like relationship with her and him and everything, I'm like, oh, this is so kind of standard. I'm like, and then of course he dies, and then she's wrought over that, and then that kind of gives her a reason to fight and all this. I'm just like, I'm like, it's all really stock. I mean, there's not a lot of invention in here, and I think that might be another part of the thing too, beyond the whole like 2 to 3 jump, is the whole, it's like we've seen this before, and we've seen it in cheaper movies. It kind of has that feeling that someone just borrowed a bunch of stuff from other places and kind of nailed it together, because it's like, oh, here's the criminal that wants to repent. Here's the doctor she falls in love with, and she's not really supposed to have this kind of relationship because she's the outlander in this whole scene and everything. So, I mean, there's interesting aspects. I just don't think it's as thought out as it could have been or should have been.
Well, it's funny that you say that, Rob, because in doing the research on this film all these years ago and then kind of re-researching it for this episode, I found that there was originally, and this is just, by the way, filmmakers who might happen to be listening, or potential filmmakers, this is a recipe for disaster, because I could think of 2 movies where this has happened on, and both of them have been garbage. One of them is Alien 3, and the other one is Indiana Jones 4. You get a producer who comes in, or a writer-producer who comes in and writes you a treatment, 20 pages or so, and says, these are all the elements that I want to see in this movie. Here, make it work. And then you hire writer upon writer upon writer. Sometimes even at the same time, you might have multiple writers writing at the same time, doing kind of a bake-off, and then you pick the best one, or you pick the one that's going to be cheapest, or you pick the one that fits with your casting, whatever it is. And that's kind of what happened with Alien 3. There was an outline by Hill and Geiler, Walter Hill and David Geiler, who had been involved with the first 2 Aliens. They wrote and rewrote and did a whole bunch of stuff to the first script, the Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett script for Alien. They did the story outline with James Cameron, which I would love to read what that story outline is. And then they did this kind of story outline initially for Alien 3. And then you can see these elements that they must have put into their treatment. You can see these coming through in scripts by William Gibson, in a script by Eric Red, in a script by David Twohy. David Twohy, who's best known to a lot of people for the whole Chronicles of Riddick movies. So you give this outline to these guys and say, okay, go make it work. And you get these weird like echoes as you're reading these scripts and stuff. And there's like this like anti-Asian thing that's happening in them. There's government intrigue, and there's all this stuff about the whole biomechanical stuff and making aliens into weapons, which we had in Aliens, and that was kind of inside of Alien, but they really take it to the fore in this thing. So we've got, like, I think in Twohy's script there's spores that can kind of infect people, so they explode and there's aliens underneath them. We've got pigs that are turning into aliens in the Eric Red script. Actually, I think the spores are in Gibson's script. I mean, these things all really kind of blend together because they all share these kind of similar elements. It's just kind of scary how similar they are. And there's some good elements. There are some great things. I have to say that Tui's script really worked well, and it seems like they kind of recycled some of that for the fourth Alien film. I don't know what Joss Whedon would say about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if Joss Whedon, for the fourth Alien, was given the exact same thing, and they probably came in and said, we wanted to see it this, that, and the other thing. Because when you think, like, 3 and 4 are pretty darn similar when it comes to running around in dark halls and different types of aliens and all this kind of stuff. But I'll say, and I know that a lot of people will hate hearing this, that I like 4 a lot in the series because it seems to be more true to the vision, whereas 3 just feels so muddled.
3 is like, it's a total Franken movie. Just cobble, like you said, like with the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, just cobbled together from all this stuff, and then they made this Franken movie out of it. And with that being said, I mean, looking at it, I don't know how much I would pick up on noticing all this stuff that here's from the script with the wooden planet, and here's with Eric Red's script and a little bit of Walter Hill and stuff like that. If I didn't know any of that and watched the movie, I don't know how much I would have picked up on that, because I mean, I didn't know all of that when I watched it in 1992. And as a movie that is like that, is cobbled together from all these different scripts with the same kind of bullet point notes, it is a pretty simplistic movie. I mean, it is like crashes onto prison planet, alien escapes onto prison planet, they all have to take care of the alien and destroy the alien. I mean, it's a pretty simple movie. It is. But then in watching it, when you know all that stuff, it is kind of distracting in watching it. It is blatantly obvious that at one point this was a monk planet. Just blatantly obvious. It's hardly like they even changed the dialogue, except to every now and then a character like with Charles Dutton says, "I'm a murderer and rapist," even though that is nothing like his character in this movie, in the rest of this movie. They mention, like, this is a prison planet. They mention it in exposition in terms of some of the characters and in some of the way that they're describing the planet. But everything else they're talking about, the fact that they've got, these shaved heads, the fact that they're talking about religion left and right, they're calling each other brothers, they're men of God. The only time this feels like it's an actual planet of prisoners is that one scene where Ripley is almost gang raped. And it's the only scene like that that's anywhere close to being like that in the movie, where it's like, okay, this is a planet of prisoners, but it's the only scene like that. Throughout watching this movie today, I'm like, they didn't even try to convert this from it being a monk planet to a prison planet in terms of the scripting for this.
Rob, knowing that you're functionally illiterate and you probably didn't do a whole lot of reading for this one, what would you say if I said to you, what Brad has brought up, that this movie at one point was supposed to be set on a planet made out of wood?
I have no idea where that comes from, because to me it seemed like the only equivalent that I can give to this in a way, and I know this is going to be odd because it's 20-something odd years in the future, is that when I'm watching this thing, I'm seeing aspects of something like Fury Road, the new Mad Max film, where it's some sort of like industrial planet, and then they have this sort of religion or philosophy sort of stamped on top of it. And that was the only thing I got from it. I got, when you said William Gibson, I got certain steampunk elements, the guys with the goggles and all of that stuff. But it just, to me, it seemed more like I said, it was like an industrial prison or something. That was the only thing that I could kind of come up with, is that, yeah, they're in a prison, but they also have to make things. And they make things for some company. And that's the only thing I could even kind of like come up with in terms of reasons of why they're there.
Well, I've talked a little bit about the Gibson draft. I've talked a little bit about the Eric Red draft, a little bit about the Tui draft. And those were going on for a while and going nowhere. And Rennie Harlan was involved at one point and was just like, no, I can't make this work. And personally, and I have no evidence to this fact, but personally, I think that he was probably being kind of strong-armed by Hill and Geiler, because to me, they have their fingerprints all over this. And it especially when we talk about the next part of this phase for this thing, it really kind of comes to the fore. But in the middle of this development that they have going on, Harlan steps out and they bring in a new person. They bring in a completely different perspective, and that was Vincent Ward. And he was the one that kind of came up with this wooden planet idea. So Eric Red won't talk to us at all. Like, we've tried to interview him several times. He's blocked us on Twitter. He won't answer my emails. Apparently he just doesn't like us. David Toohey won't talk about the past, or at least that's what he says via email. So I said, okay, let's talk about the next Riddick film. Still no answer. But fortunately, Vincent Ward did talk to us about this film. So we're going to take a break and play an interview with Vincent Ward, the man who provided the original story to Alien 3, or at least the version that made it to screen. And we're also going to talk with John Fasano, the writer of that particular draft. How did the film Vigil come about?
There'd been a lot of interest in the work I'd done, and so basically I had felt that the New Zealand Film Commission would finance eagerly my first feature. I just had to really write it, but it took me quite a while. And the last film, I'd been living in a Maori community for several years, and I started thinking about what it was like growing up on an isolated farm and the sorts of experiences I had and the sorts of experiences my sisters had, and I tried to imagine a character, an 11-year-old girl, and what would have happened, how she would have seen it when her father was suddenly killed, through this lens of this girl who was a kind of very isolated, not simple, but saw things in almost apocalyptic terms. And I started to write a story of her experiences. And the film we managed to finance really easily through the Film Commission because of the interest in the work I'd done to date.
Your really big breakout film, the one that I remember seeing at pretty much every video store that I went to back in the day, was The Navigator, A Medieval Odyssey. How did that movie come about, and why was that the one, do you think, that really kind of broke through for you, for at least American audiences?
Vigil had been accepted into competition at Cannes and had won a number of international awards. I started traveling and I wanted to do a story that was more imaginative of what it was, again, also about isolation, but about medieval miners that fear the Black Death, and at least in the dreams of one of their own, a child amongst them, believe that they can burrow through the earth to reach a sort of promised land, a place of escape and refuge. And so the story follows his dreams, and they start to believe that they can find some sort of hope or some sort of place of escape. And so I wrote that, and much to my surprise, we actually got finance for it because it was such an outlandish idea. And I managed to give the film its own reality, so you would buy into the big conceit at the center of it. And I think you could take it seriously, but you'd still have a little part of you that would have this it'd have this wryness to it, this sense of the irony of it. And so people seem to really respond to it. In New Zealand, Vigil is the film that people really like, and in America and Australia, it's The Navigator, and in Canada, it's Map of the Human Heart. I don't know why The Navigator people seem to respond to it. I think that whole medieval world was very convincing in it, and I think the imaginative leap that is taken in the film of medievals effectively burrowing through the earth, people sort of enjoyed the leap of imagination, I guess. And I think the kids in it are terrific. The actors are great, and it's a really strong narrative.
It comes out around, 1988, and somewhere around here you get noticed, at least is what I'm imagining, you get involved with the Alien 3 project. How did that kind of come about? How did that happen for you?
Well, after The Navigator, I had I was offered a lot of projects, a lot of big studio films. I had a meeting with Spielberg. I had, a lot of, I can't remember, there's so many of them that sort of came my way. And I didn't really want to do a genre film. When I was approached for Alien 3, I kind of turned it down. I sort of said, I'm not really interested. But they kept coming back to me and saying, look, there's a terrific opportunity. I had an agent then who was Ridley Scott's agent, had a number of other, well-known directors, and he just said, "You're mad, you've got to do it." And I said, "Well, I hate the story they've got." So they flew me across to Los Angeles, and on the plane I had an idea, which was what would happen if you went almost in an opposite direction from most science fiction films. And instead of having one button that does 1,000 things, you have 1,000 people that do one thing. The idea that you have a monastery of monks in outer space who refuse to do things overtly with modern technology. And even though they have modern technology at the hub of their environment, so they can control gravity and oxygen, most of their work is done by using windmills and effectively pre-12th century machinery and physical labor. So everything is hard. They've chosen to live the hard way as much as they possibly can. And that was the concept.
When you arrive and you have this concept, how is this kind of accepted? Did they decide to run with this thing right away?
Yeah, absolutely. They knew that the script they had was tired, and they were looking for something fresh. I mean, what had been wonderful about Alien 1 was that it was so fresh. And what was great about Alien 2 was that it took it in a completely different direction and just allowed for a wonderful and extraordinary world for an audience to enter and get lost in. And it also, once you put an alien at the heart of it, killing off monks, it would be, it was clear that it would be truly terrifying.
At this point in the project, did you know if Sigourney Weaver was going to come back, or did you have to write it around the possibility that she wouldn't be there?
There were two options, really. The studio wanted Sigourney Weaver, and Sigourney Weaver didn't want to do another Alien. So I wrote, she'd be prepared to do this one, it would seem, but she didn't want to do another one after that. So I wrote two versions of the story, one with her dying, and another one with her kind of surviving. And she went for the one where she died.
I know that John Fasano worked with you on this. What was his relationship with you when you guys were working out the script?
I came up with a story before I met John, registered it at the Guild and so on, and was given story credit for it, sole story credit. And then I had two different writers that I had attached to it to help with the screenplay. I'd give them my notes in detail of how I saw it being done as a screenplay, and then they would go off and write.
I really liked what you were doing with it as far as the idea of, like, the alien being the demon. If this was a monk society, that it seems like the alien is kind of being the demon that they all are fearing in their religious practices. Yeah,
and of course, Ridley being a pragmatist and scientific behavioralist knows that's not the case at all, but it's almost impossible, except for one monk who she befriends, to communicate the real nature of this creature.
Yeah, I have to say, I've read the early drafts, I've read this one, I've read the ones that came before it, and really, this draft that you guys put together is, so much of what ended up being the final film, with the monk colony, with the befriending of the one character. Just so much of this became what we know as Alien 3.
Yeah, all of that was in the story that I wrote. The befriending of the one monk, all of that was in the original story I wrote. It was only about, 8 pages or something, but it had all those elements in it.
And I liked all the dream imagery that was going on as well, and just kind of being able to use that, because other than some of the scares that you get in something like an Aliens, where she's imagining that she has the creature inside of her, you don't get a lot of the dream imagery that you guys were utilizing, which kind of precludes some of your later projects.
Yeah, well, I've been playing around with a medieval world in the Navigator, and then I have a sort of hellish world in What Dreams May Come. So I like evoking those kind of, for one of not really gothic worlds, but that sort of darker and more frightening than the way you would describe gothic normally. Just engulfing worlds that sort of engulf you and terrify you.
Now, how long do you think that you were on the project for?
I think I was on for about 10 months. I actually ended up at Pinewood and starting to go into pre-production, working with a production designer and other people, with a line producer. So we were actively working towards getting the film made. But, we started to run into some hiccups.
I don't know if it's indelicate of me to ask or whatever, but it feels like from everything that I've seen reading about this project, it feels like Walter Hill and David Giler were really kind of overbearing and controlling when it came to the project. Do you feel comfortable saying yes or no about that?
I see it's a bit more complicated than that. I can't speak for what happened with David Fincher because I wasn't there. I think that what happened was a kind of conjunction of several things. Primarily, Murdoch took over the studio. He bought the studio, he bought Fox, and he needed a tentpole film. And suddenly we had a release date before we had an agreed-upon script, or anywhere near an agreed-upon script. And then the next thing that happened was, as I think sometimes happens with sequels, people became driven purely by the franchise, by their fears, and also would the franchise, if it was original and at all unorthodox, would it make the money that everybody hoped it would make as the main tentpole film for Fox that year? And with that then came this raft of orthodoxy and conservatism, and the life of the project was very quickly leached out of it. That's what I started to notice. Everything I loved about the project was rapidly disappearing. The only reason I decided to do it was because of this. I believed one could create this almost prequel, this totally unique world that you would get surprised by and lost in, and that one had never seen in a science fiction film before. And suddenly all of that was disappearing, and I went, hold on, what's going on here? I felt that they were the messengers of death, not death itself.
It's a good way of putting it, I suppose.
I think they themselves were caught up in a kind of crappy situation, and they were struggling. And Walter is very much a straight genre director. He's not cross genre. It was not a great situation. It devolved into not a great situation, but it was sort of really unfortunate.
Were there any silver linings for you when it came to the project? Did this manage to keep doors open for you in Hollywood, or help, get Map of the Human Heart made or anything? Or was this pretty much just a wash for you 10 months down the drain?
Oh, I don't think it was a wash because the film, that my idea has this, I think, significant cult following. The film I never made has a significant cult following. So since then, there've been, a number of significant articles and pieces on that project. One by a London Times writer who wrote a book called The Greatest Science Fiction Films Never Made, and I believe listed that as, one of the top, if not the top film that was never made, even though I got story credit on the final result of Alien 3, much to my surprise. So, in the first day that appeared in that Empire magazine article, my website crashed because I have on VincentWardFilms.com the gist visually of that whole idea, and it's the only place you can find it. So it appeared in an Empire magazine article, it appeared in this book, The Greatest Science Fiction Films Never Made, and people recognize that I have some sort of ability or gift for evoking these worlds. So I went ahead and just made another film, Map of the Human Heart, which was incredibly well respected, and then eventually went to live in Los Angeles and was fortunate enough to make What Dreams May Come. I don't think Alien 3 led to What Dreams May Come, but it certainly didn't harm it.
When it comes to What Dreams May Come, how familiar were you with the Matheson before you kind of came to the project?
I had never read the Matheson book. Somewhere along the line, I read I Am Legend, which I love. I just love it, though I don't think a decent adaptation of it's ever been done at all. So I think he's a terrific writer. What happened was I was approached by a producer, Steve Simon. He had the script that he'd been trying to get made for 20 years and failed. And he had attached a writer, a very good screenwriter, Ron Bass. And he said, "What do you think?" And I turned it down. And partly was also through a conversation in a meeting I had with Ron Bass as well. And then I thought about it. And I thought, you know what? The problem with this story, which I found very moving, is that there's no way to visualize it. Essentially what happens is a guy dies and goes to the afterlife, and his wife commits suicide, and Orpheus-like, he goes to find her in hell. How do you visualize that? How do you visualize a sort of paradise without it becoming, just all misty white and so on? And I had this idea, what if you made this woman a painter, and she created these paintings of places, a kind of composite of experiences they'd had in her paintings, and also she restored paintings, 19th century paintings that were really the last vestige of when most people believed in an afterlife, in a sort of less, as a concrete place. And what would happen if she restored those paintings? And when he died, that was the world that he evoked to remember her. That was the afterlife that he created out of his imagination. So it was a subjective or personal afterlife. And that was in keeping with the book, because it spoke about when you die, you create some sort of subjective afterlife. And then she dies, and the afterlife that she imagines, or the after death that she imagines in hell, is an evocation of her denial, her fears, the images in her mind of that world, and that's the world he journeys into.
It is one of the most beautiful movies that I can remember ever seeing. Just the way that you evoke those paintings, the colors, everything popping off the screen. How did you work with your crew, your director of photography and everything, to capture that brilliance on screen?
Look, I had a terrific crew, but the first steps happened long before we shot. The creation of those kind of worlds is conceptualization long before you film. The first challenge I had was I wanted to create a visceral, living, painted world in this afterlife. I wanted to bring these paintings alive. So when you walked into them, you were slopping through paint, and paint actually moved, and it didn't move in the way that traditional animation evocations of painted worlds move. It had to have its own unique, real, inverted commas, character. So I went shopping to various visual effects houses, and one visual effect house had some access to some very, very cutting-edge technology. And in fact, we won an Academy Award for visual effects when the film was completed, and another Academy Award for we were nominated for production design. So we embraced that technology, and I brought together a number of fantastic artists to see it, because at that time, you see, a lot of computer technicians were either geeks, were tended to be more geek-orientated and less art-orientated. That's changed now. But at that time, you seldom, in raw cutting-edge technology, you seldom got something that looked visually amazing. And so I tried to find people that could cross that bridge. And we did hundreds of drawings, and we assembled these different teams, and some of them were existing teams at some visual effects houses, because we had 4 visual effects houses on it. And then we brought in a very good production designer whose sets were great and augmented that vision, and that's how it evolved.
Tight cast when it came to What Dreams May Come. What was it like working with Robin Williams, Annabella Sciorra, Cuba Gooding Jr., and Max von Sydow?
It was funny in the sense that it was, each of those actors has such completely distinct styles and come from quite different acting traditions. Max von Sydow, you'd say, "Look, can we improvise this?" And he goes, "No way. I'm Swedish, and I love these words that Ron Bass has written. Don't change a single word. And I to me, it's whatever the character wants, And so you go, "Okay, Max." and Annabella Sciorra is somebody that would very reluctantly improv also, but has extraordinary emotional depth, and so she would nail it in 1 or 2 takes, and the performance would not get better because she'd actually gone deep within her kind of psyche to draw up almost, the real internal tickings of a woman that's right on the edge. And sometimes, she would be on the edge as you would, work with her. So you'd sort of take a step back and create a lot of space around her and just make sure you didn't get in her way. Cuba Gooding Jr. likes to improv. He doesn't like to prepare much, unlike Annabella, unlike Max. He's very spontaneous, but you had to be there in case he didn't nail a scene. So when he was on, it was just extraordinary because he's so alive. But if he missed, you had to be there and be prepared to work through and really know how to nail a scene and help him. And a true delight to work with. And Robin's Robin, he's a legend. He would do anything you asked. You could talk through a scene as you were directing, as the scene was being shot, and suggest what's happening to him, almost like a voice coming in through the back of his head, and as if it was his own thought. He would be totally open to improv. He was incredibly generous with the other actors, and unstinting with his kindness to the extras. And he would always be there. I would call him the stealth bomber because you never knew when he was on set. Because, contrary to what people think of Robin, where they see him riffing and talking and, on a run, the Robin I knew most of the time didn't say much, and he'd just quietly be there observing and taking things in. And then sometimes he'd go on one of these wonderful, humorous journeys with the extras just to keep them buoyed up on a long night when everybody was cold.
I do have to admit, though, What Dreams May Come might be one of the most heart-wrenching films that I've ever seen, and it is a film that I can't watch more than maybe once a decade, just because every time it just is a punch to the gut.
Well, it's interesting. It's been interesting how it was received. Initially, it had some reviewers that loved it, Siskel and Ebert, the main American reviewers. But, reviewers generally are skeptical of anything that's overtly emotional, and so they were reserved in their response to it. But on websites like Rotten Tomatoes, you see that the audiences have loved that film, and it scored incredibly high with just the regular viewers. And that rating keeps going up and up and up as time goes on. That's exciting to me because I'd set out to make a film that was accessible.
You started your career off with a narrative and a documentary, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the last movie that you made also a documentary, The Reign of the Children?
Yeah, it was.
How was that going back to the documentary after all these years?
Well, the last one was a drama documentary, and it was a continuation of the first documentary I made. It was about a woman and her life, and this time round I wanted to tell her whole life as a feature and dramatize large sections of it. And I have to tell you a bit about myself. I grew up on an isolated farm in New Zealand, and my father had always wanted to be a storyteller, and he'd wanted to be a writer. And during the Second World War, he kind of was badly injured, and he lost that opportunity, except to tell stories by writing the love letters home of the other soldiers. They would pay him to write their love letters home. And over the years, he continued, he became a farmer, and it wasn't what he ever wanted to do. But as he got older, people asked him to tell the stories of the people who'd just died, so to do the eulogies at the funerals. And he had this gift for telling people's stories. He could, in front of an audience that knew those people, could say something about their lives, so they almost got out of the coffin and started walking around that isolated country church. And he probably did 50 of these, 50 different people. And his whole life, he finally, right towards the end, found his moment to tell the stories of people, not on paper, but in words. And I hope that if I've inherited anything, it's something of my father's gift, and that's actually what I aspire towards, And in telling Reign of the Children, I went back. This woman had died some 30 years previously, and her son had died that I'd made this documentary about in 1978, 79. And it was a mystery surrounding her. Why did she walk like she was doubled over? Why did people say that she was cursed? What had happened to her? And I managed to excavate in her life and find out exactly her really extraordinary story. And that became Reign of the Children.
So not only are you a filmmaker, but you also have a lot of books to your credit. Can you tell me about some of the stuff that you've had?
Well, there was a book on my work that came out in America that's been quite successful called Making the Transformational Moment in Film, and that's been largely a book that's available at film schools. So that's not one I wrote, but it's one on my work. I like doing books that are very visual, that are part of either the last book that I did was a very large format art book with paintings, composite paintings, photographs, that take you into these almost mysterious worlds with naked figures in them, underwater and cocoon-like. So that's called Inhale, Exhale. It's not on Amazon, but it's available from my website. It's a beautiful book that's so heavy it's almost like a deadly weapon, but it's had a terrific response and great reviews. I did another book which was a film book before that was to do with my films. It sold out. Called The Past Awaits, with stories in and around and behind the films I've made about the people that I worked with. And again, was very well reviewed. And then I did a book a number of years ago. I don't know, I like doing these sort of these picture books, but that have quite significant stories in and around some of the images in the books themselves.
What else have you been up to lately?
I'm writing a series at the moment, a TV series. I've written another feature film that Richard Taylor's doing work for us on. We've just come back from working with Richard Taylor from Weta. I've done, I think, 12 exhibitions, some of them large, 2 of them in China, art exhibitions. One I took over a full cathedral, which had nothing else in it. They'd rebuilt it, and so it was no longer a religious place. But I was there as part of the Shanghai Biennale as New Zealand's first entrant, with massive works that were anywhere from 7 to 15 meters in height and with video projections. So I kind of work as a filmmaker, an artist, and writer. I get sent material, scripts, and which I read and see if there's something I want to make. But I'm quite picky, and I really have to believe it's a story I want to, put 3 years into. So that's really what I'm doing.
So where can people go to kind of keep up on your work?
People can go to vincentwardfilms.com. I only put a tiny percentage of artwork that I do on there. The most original stuff I like to keep to myself, unless people contact me directly.
I have to ask about your role on Alien 3. I'm strangely fascinated by that film, and I've been trying to learn as much as I can about the behind the scenes of it. Mm-hmm. At what point were you kind of brought in? And I know there were so many different scripts that were involved with that one.
But you see here, there were so many different scripts while they were trying to figure out who was going to be the director. At one point, Rennie Harlan was the director, and I was working with him. And then he went off to do Ford Fairlane or something like that. And Walter Hill said, the new craze is bringing in these guys from Australia. There's 2 guys, or New Zealand. There was the guy, George Miller, who had done Dead Calm. Did he do Dead Calm? And there was this guy that did The Navigator, Vincent Ward. And he said, who would you hire of those? So I didn't know he was talking about that. But I just remembered that I read the review of The Navigator and thought, this guy made a movie about some monks in New Zealand in the 1400s who go into a cave and come out in New Zealand in 2000, in 1990. And I said, that guy's got a good sense of something. So they hired that guy to direct Alien 3. And he came in and he said, here's my idea. It's a planet made of wood, and it's creaking in space, and they're all monks. They're all Trappist monks. They've left the Earth because books were dying out, and they're preserving all the books. If you ever saw his movie, What Dreams May Come, there's a scene in a library where they're floating in these huge stacks of books. that was supposed to be in the Alien 3. And so they said, we need somebody to get a script out in like 2 weeks. And so Joe Roth, who was the head of Fox at the time, called me up and said, Johnny, you want to write Alien 3? I was like, okay. So I met with Vincent, and then I realized that it had taken him 4 years to make The Navigator. And they wanted a script in 2 weeks from us that they could shoot. And they wanted him to go to England like within a month and start prepping the movie. And he was like, let's talk about it. And they were like, no, you got to just shoot this movie. And I would say to him, look, just do what they want, and you'll have made a big movie that made money, and you'll be able to do whatever you want. So I did all these drafts of Alien 3, and then at one point they brought in another guy for one draft who goes in interviews and says he did all the drafts of Alien 3, which isn't true. And then they brought me back again, and they told me, get your papers in order, you're going to England. And then one day they just said, oh, you know what, Larry Ferguson, we're going to do the last draft with Larry Ferguson, who was a friend of mine who had written Beverly Hills Cop 3 or something like that, and The Presidio with Mark Harmon and Sean Connery. And I just felt totally distraught. In fact, that could have been the end of my career that day, because I could have just said, oh, fuck this, and gone back to New York, to do low-budget horror movies, because I had just done another 48 Hours for Walter and worked on Alien for a year, and then they would just replace me without telling me why or anything like that. And then Larry Ferguson, they didn't like his script. They got rid of him, and then Walter and David Giler, who'd rewritten the first Alien, came in and they rewrote it. I think everybody has credit on that movie except me, because I walked out. Because what happened was Vincent Ward got fired. Vincent Ward went to England. Now, you got to understand, when he was over here in America, and they'd say, "What's your vision for the movie?" And he'd say, "It's Hieronymus Bosch. It's men with a goat's head and a dog's body." And they were like, cool, because they'd never heard of that before. And he'd show them these pictures of these that Bosch had drawn. But when he went to England, where Terry Gilliam makes his movies, the guys were like, yeah, Bosch, we just did that for Terry Gilliam and, in The Time Bandits. Like, to them, it was nothing special. And they started calling back to America and saying, this kid's vision isn't special. And the killer, he can't make up his mind. Like, when you're a director, you have to, somebody says, what color is this wall? And you say, gray. No, blue-gray. No, let's try blue and then see how that looks. They're going to fire you. Because what they need a director to say is, it's gray, 50% gray. You don't even have to be right. You just have to be decisive. So then they brought in David Fincher. And David Fincher, now, at this time, I'm the writer of the movie. So I meet with Fincher, and I hear he's trying to get Robert Bolt, who wrote Lawrence of Arabia, to do the rewrite. Because it's his first big movie. He wants someone famous to do it. He doesn't want me. He doesn't know who I am. But Robert Bolt wouldn't do it. They brought in Larry Ferguson, who, by the way, had laughed at me when I said I would took the job to write Alien 3. He was like, that's a crappy idea. Of course, he took the job. And then they went over and they made the movie. But, if I had an opportunity to finish the draft I was working on for Fincher, and it would have put me in a better position to get credit. But I was so devastated that they had hired all these other people and not told me. I just went like, oh, fuck it, and walked off. So, they didn't notice because they already had hired other people. But I would have had a script that I did for Fincher would have helped me in getting credit, but I didn't do that. And, and I luckily, my agent got me a big deal at Sony to do 3 movies there. So my career could have stopped right there with Alien 3, but it didn't.
I'm remembering your draft as you're talking about it. Didn't you have, at the very end, someone in the audience actually yell out the alien was in the dog?
The alien was in the dog?
Yeah, because I think the only people that are left are one of the monks and the dog. And he's had a little thing that said, like, a teenager in the back row shouts, it's in the dog.
The alien's in the dog, yeah. That was. And also what was really fucked up was that from the beginning of this process, Sigourney said, look, I don't care what you guys do, but at the end of this movie I have to die. Because I fought this thing 3 times and beat it 3 times, and I don't want to do another one of these movies. And I said, well, what if it's a huge hit? She goes, well, they'll bring me back as a clone or say it was a dream. She was very pragmatic. They got our script, and they're like, you killed Sigourney. And I said, well, she wants to die. And they said, no. So I had the priest give her CPR and suck the alien out of her esophagus into himself, and then he jumps in the fire or whatever. But by then Vincent was gone, And then Fincher comes in, and when I first met Fincher, I said, well, what's your vision of the movie? He goes, I'm going to kill Sigourney at the end. And they were like, that's a great idea. And I was like, you just fired this other guy for having that idea. And by the way, Alien 3 could have been the end of Fincher's career.
Right.
You know, I remember a moment where the budget was like $45 million. And he had just done this Madonna video that cost like $2 million a minute or something. And he said, well, you know, you're only going to get like an hour-long movie for that much money. Like, they all laughed, and he went to England and shot the whole movie. They cut it together and came back, and it was like an hour long. And then in L.A., they spent another $25 million and shot enough to make it long enough to be Alien 3. But he told them up front, that's what you get for that much money. You know, that just nobody believed it, you know. Nobody believed it.
We're back. Thanks to Mr. Ward for taking the time to talk to us. Also, very glad to have had the opportunity to talk to Mr. Fasano about his work on Alien 3. We interviewed with him back on our Black Roses episode, and in case you were unaware, Mr. Fasano passed away just about 6 weeks after our Black Roses episode dropped, just about a year ago.
We've got Mr. Ward talking to us about the wooden planet, which then, to your point, Brad, really was not too much of a stretch to kind of go back to Tui's draft, which was very much a prison thing, and kind of merge the two together. And around this time, after Mr. Ward leaves the project, that's when we get David Fincher in here. And he's working, I can't remember which writer he was working with. It was somebody that went completely uncredited on it, who had really not a whole lot of nice things to say about Hill and Geiler, which is another reason why I'm kind of, led to believe this. And then also, I know that there were meetings with Hill and Geiler where they were completely dismissive of David Fincher as being the guy who sells shoes, because he's coming to us from a commercial and music video background. And, and you can really see, like, what was that Madonna song? Not Vogue, but the video kind of has this same look that we're going to get in Alien 3. So if we had Madonna in a suit and a monocle kind of in the mix, it wouldn't have been too much of a stretch. But it's also around this time with Fincher and with Ward's draft that we finally get Ripley kind of coming into the film, because all the previous drafts to that, they weren't sure if she was going to be back. They weren't sure if they were going to get Sigourney Weaver, which also made for a weird thing, because here we were talking about who's the protagonist. They were beefing up all these other roles, not knowing if Ripley was going to be back. So I think that's another reason why it's so confusing as to who we're following. Yeah, Ripley's the most familiar face to us, but she's not necessarily the most prominent character sometimes. The other thing that I think, we were talking about how simple the script is, and I think one of the biggest flaws for me of what that theatrical version was, and we're still talking about the theatrical version, the biggest problem I had with it is that it almost feels like they do the exact same thing twice. Like, hey, we've got an alien. Like, finally they believe Ripley. It only takes about an hour for them to finally believe Ripley that there's an alien here. So we're going to get this alien and contain it. And then within, 5 minutes, Paul McGann, the Eighth Doctor, lets the alien out. And then they have to do it all the fuck over again. And it's like, what the hell? Why did that even happen?
I don't understand why they weren't believing her in this movie.
It takes the alien to burst out of the ceiling, grab this guy and yank him up, and that's the only time that they fucking leave her.
That's all it. Which, admittedly, that scene is very funny.
It is funny. Yeah.
I know I've been pretty negative so far, but there are things I like about this movie. One of them is I did laugh here and there during the movie at parts that really felt like I was supposed to be laughing. That part in particular, and then it cuts to the reaction shot of the prisoner who just simply goes, "Fuck!" and then cut to the next scene of some guy mopping up this body while paranoid looking up towards the ceiling, like making sure that an alien isn't going to come down and kill him. There's funny stuff like that in this movie.
But at the same time, I think she kind of brings it on herself. I mean, they at least kind of like allude to it in the beginning because, you know, when she has like I said, again, I don't know who she is. The girl sort of, she wants this autopsy for the girl, and she keeps going on about, oh, there's this disease. So she's not even willing to like level with them. It's like she wants to, I think she kind of wants to tiptoe around it before something even happens. So it's like, it's kind of on her too to go, oh yeah, we had this thing, and I think I may have brought it with me. So instead of saying that, she's trying to like get them to do things sort of in a different way. She's trying to get them to investigate, but not investigate that thing. So it's kind of on her too, I think.
Totally agree. I was thinking the same thing when I was watching it. I was like, what is the harm in telling them that there's possibly an alien on the loose that might try to kill them, that will try to kill them if the alien is actually there? Like, I'm watching this, like, in this universe, are there really that many alien skeptics? Like, this really seems like it would be something you could easily explain to someone. Like, I've just come from outer space, and I've got a few different dead bodies with me. There's an acid hole in the chamber. Bodies are ripped apart left and right. It's not that hard. It shouldn't be that hard to convince someone there might be an alien on board this ship that crashed on this planet with me.
Well, you know, she did just have to try to explain that all to the people back on the space station in Aliens, where, you know, they're like, you know,
a creature that gestates inside a living human host. Yes. These are your words. And has concentrated acid for blood.
That's right. Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
I would take the time and try to explain it again. I would also take the time to get myself checked out way earlier than Ripley gets herself checked out in the film. Because I know I've been there. I'm Ripley. I've been there when Ash in the first movie has the alien pop out of his chest. I understand how these things work. I should probably go in for an X-ray much earlier than I do.
She's got to wait until she thinks she has food poisoning.
I'm really hoping that some crazy alien fan can explain to me, just because I know how the alien life cycle works, right? There's egg, there's face hugger, there's baby alien that bursts out of you. That kind of grows up into a full-fledged alien, and then maybe every once in a while there's a queen, so you can kind of propagate the life cycle. I see the egg in the chamber. I've seen the face hugger that was kind of crawling up in these brief opening credits. So I imagine that the face hugger is kind of attaching itself to Hicks in this, and that's where the baby is exploding out of, because there's got to be an alien that is able to explode out of Hicks, I guess, or somehow gets into that ox and then that explodes out. But does that mean Ripley's also impregnated with this thing? So does that mean that there were two eggs, or was there a whole life cycle that I didn't see that was on the Sulaco?
I don't know. I don't understand it.
Well, that whole thing with Ripley having one inside of her, it's like, how long do these things incubate? Because we're led to believe in, at least in the first film, the one I saw, it doesn't take that long. Like a day or two? And I get the feeling this has been definitely longer than a day or two. So, like, to me, timelines are weird.
I didn't get the feeling from her discovering she has an alien inside of her in the end of the movie that it's been that long of a period. Maybe just because everything looks the same here. It's all in these dark, long hallways. It's all indoors. Everyone's all wearing the same thing. it is kind of hard to grasp how much time has kind of passed in some of these things. Like, so when I was watching it earlier, I could actually buy that it was maybe less than a day between her discovering that inside of her and then what happens at the end of the movie. Or, like you said, it's entirely possible it could have been even longer than that, because everything just kind of looks the same in this movie.
I mean, for me, I figure it's at least a week, because it's like she gets saved, she's revived, she starts having the relationship with Clemens, they have the autopsy of the girl. I mean, it just seems like it's more than just like 2 days. It seems a little longer than that.
I don't know if this was in the movie or if this is something that I read, but I think that she has been infected with a queen. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of the explanations that you can kind of throw in there is, well, this is a queen and that takes longer to gestate.
That is in the film, because she says it's a queen because the alien won't attack her. So that's what she figures out. How she figures that out, I don't know, but that's how she figures it out.
Yeah, I guess you got to protect the queen kind of thing.
I must kill the queen.
And again, I'm not sure exactly how she's getting infected. I mean, sure, she could have had the face hugger on inside of the sulaco and it would have fallen away and all that kind of stuff. And there's a whole bunch of mess. But it just feels like there's one too many alien going on in here, as if it might have been written to the script a little bit later on or something. And then there's this whole idea, too, as far as this thing, whether it's the version that you watched, guys, where it gestated inside of a dog, or there's the version that I watched as well, where it gestated inside of an ox.
Where's the fetus gonna gestate? You're gonna keep it in a box?
The alien is different. She says, I've never seen one move this way. And there's this whole idea as to, depending on what creature the alien occupies, gestates in, that it somehow absorbs the characteristics of that alien. And we're going to see that a lot, like in Alien versus Predator, when an alien infects a predator and it comes out and it's got the fourfold mouth kind of thing. I don't know if I necessarily buy that. I don't know what kind of life form would adopt the characteristics of the creature that it's inside of, because it seems like you could be inside of a really shitty creature and then come out and just be ridiculous. Like, you could gestate inside of a chicken and you'd come out and you'd have a beak or something, and like a little beak inside of your mouth that would like shoot out and grab corn. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Is that what some of those like storyboards from like when Vincent Ward was working on this were like, where it was like one alien looked kind of like a sheep but had a human face out its ass, and like one of them looked like a horse? Like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, people have gone crazy with this idea. Like, if you have an alien inside of a rhino, then you get one that has like a horn on the top of its head and has super thick skin. If an alien is inside of a T-Rex and it's got little tiny arms but it's really big, or just all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, I don't know how long your race would survive if you adopt the genetic code of the creatures that you're in, because then, is crossbreeding allowed, or are we okay with that? I mean, it seems like you know the Punnett squares would just be fucking crazy as far as what's a major trait and what's a minor trait, you know, what's a recessive. So I don't know. It just seems kind of weird to me. And that seemed to be like in those scripts that I was talking about, they were all about that stuff. Like the Eric Red script has this scene that actually would have been very effective, where it was the main character kind of rides into this military base with a load of hogs, and these hogs are there to be basically put in front of the eggs, and the face huggers come out and attack these hogs and impregnate these hogs, and then next thing you know, it becomes this abattoir of aliens bursting out of these pigs all over the place. And that would have been kind of a cool scene, but then the aliens have, you know, porcine qualities, and I was just like, yeah, that's kind of weird, man.
That would have made Alien 3 even better for me. Comes out the ox, and he's part ox.
Have the horns on it and everything.
As the horns. But he already came out of a dog. He could have been part dog and just shit everywhere.
Part of the problem is that with like sequels, we've come to expect that each one, like, you're going to get more of something. And in here, it just kind of feels like there's just not enough aliens. Like, I was expecting like more than just one main creature or two creatures. I was expecting like dozen creatures or something. And it just sort of feels also like they just shot lower with a sequel, is what you expect.
It feels like a total slasher film.
It does. Yeah, especially the hallways and the running around, and those point of view shots from the alien don't necessarily help that much to me. Some of those just get really kind of cheesy.
That was actually something I kind of liked about it. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's because I do dig slasher movies, I don't know, but like if there was one sequence in the movie that I remember even liking when I was a kid, and I kind of enjoyed too when I watched it earlier, was this whole sequence of about 20 minutes where they're just kind of going around trying to find the alien and pissing it off and running away from it. One guy throws like a torch at it. Then the one guy just yells up at it and curses at it, and it's like 3 times, and they're just like running away from this alien. It's like they're a group of children pissing off the neighborhood dog and running back to their house.
And I just didn't find that whole like running from it even possible, because to me this creature is able to outrun us. I mean, it's kind of like a cheetah, at least sort of in my mind. These guys would have been toast. They would have just been bait to kind of hang out in some place. That would have been about it. And I'm not buying it when they're trying to trap it and all that. It just, what are you marathon runners over here? What are you, Carl Lewis all of a sudden? You Olympic runners on this prison planet?
Yeah, well, I would have been absolutely fine with that. Had I, like I said earlier, had they only done it once. Because then it becomes, let's do it all again. Within like just a few minutes, and that to me is another mark of this weird amalgamation script where it's like, hey, let's do this thing and capture this alien. Paul McGann lets him out. Paul McGann, who I think was a very interesting character, kind of crazy. We get him introduced fairly early in here. The 2 other prisoners talking about how much he smells and how unpleasant he is to be around. And then this whole thing where he thinks that the alien is a dragon. In earlier drafts, he thought that it was a demon. And we kind of had that demon thing going on with the monks, which kind of makes sense as well. And yeah, like he thinks that the alien is his friend, and that kind of would have worked a little bit, but I don't think that they really explored that as much as they should have.
No, don't they completely cut most of that out in the theatrical cut? Like, he's just gone from the movie, like, halfway through.
And it's hilarious. In the making of, Paul McGann talks about his accent, that he sounds completely different from one scene to another.
I didn't even notice that until he mentioned it. Like, when I was watching it, I didn't even think about that, because I was watching, it's like, okay, well, he's just crazy. He's just seen this guy murdered and has a bunch of blood on him, so he's acting crazy.
Yeah, now it's one of those, now I can't unsee it or unhear it. It's like, thanks, Paul. Paul McGann, another fantastic actor who just, didn't have a lot to work with. So many of these guys that were in the prison colony were terrific actors, and just some of them just aren't given enough. Pete Postlethwaite, one of the best actors that we've had, so fantastic, and just a minimal amount of dialogue that he's got. And it just like, I feel bad that he doesn't have more to do. And sometimes I wonder if there's too many prisoners, because we're not able to get enough. But then, of course, these are just, 90% of them are just, well, more like 99% of them are just dead meats walking around waiting for the alien to kill them.
Oh, the one guy who seems to just purposefully fall right into that fan that's going kind of slow, but chops him up like it was an airplane propeller.
I told them not to sharpen the blades on this fan so much.
Wow. I was sitting there like, well, that was some good gore there. That was a good, like, exploding person effect they just did. They probably could have turned that fan on a little higher. That would have made it a little more realistic.
Or maybe, like, when you come to clean up the hallway, you turn off the fan, and then, you got a little sign next to it that says, please remember to turn on when leaving, I don't know, safety first. You gotta be safe.
I like that he's singing In the Year 2525 by Zager and Evans. So they got a boombox somewhere on the planet.
Let's go ahead and take another break, and we're going to talk to two of the actors who were involved in Alien 3, Lance Henriksen and Holt McCallany, after these brief messages.
Let me ask you a question. Are you getting enough? I bet you'd love more, right? Well, AdamandEve.com wants to give you more with 10 free gifts. First, you'll get a sexy surprise for her. Second, a specially selected toy for him. And third, a little something we know you'll both enjoy. Plus, you'll get 6 full-length adult movies on DVD. And number 10, free shipping on your entire order. So what do you have to do to get your 10 free gifts? It's not hard. Just go to AdamandEve.com and select any one item. It could be an adventurous new toy, sexy piece of lingerie, or anything you desire. Just enter offer code BOOTH at checkout, and you'll get all 10 free gifts. Go check out AdamandEve.com today. Select one item and get 10 free gifts, including free shipping when you enter offer code BOOTH. That's BOOTH at AdamandEve.com.
If you listen to Proudly Resents, the Cult Movie Podcast, you would know how to properly crush a head.
But let's say you want to crush a head like Toxic Avenger or the famous full head crushing scene. You take a cantaloupe, carve out the inside, then you load what we call loading the cantaloupe. We used to put in hamburger mixed with cranberry sauce, but now, because I'm a vegetarian, it's only cranberry and spaghetti and things that are not animal. Then you put a wig on the cantaloupe and paint a little happy face. Bingo.
That was Lloyd Kaufman from Troma Films. To hear more interviews and reviews, go to ProudlyResents.com or find Proudly Resents on iTunes and Stitcher.
We are the Popcorn Poops. My name is Dustin.
And my name is Jessica.
And together we produce Popcorn Poops, the best married couple movie commentary track podcast on the internet.
Join us each week as we take turns picking films and then watch and discuss them together. If you're at home or with a computer or device, you can sync up the movie and watch it right along with us.
However, you don't have to sync up the film to enjoy the show. Feel free to tune in like you would to any other podcast.
Please visit us on the internet at www.popcornpoops.com.
Again, that's www.popcornpoops.com.
Are you as sick of the endless, poorly realized remakes as we are? That's where our show comes in. Every 2 weeks, we discuss a classic movie actively in development for a remake. We figure out what works and what doesn't, throw a dash of humor at it, and then we craft our own remake. By the end of every episode, we'll have our film gift wrapped and ready to go for all of those Hollywood suits. We will remake this movie right. Remake This Movie Right can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, your favorite podcast app, or just visit us at RemakeThisMovieRight.com. The next time you're watching a film that you love, just remember, it will be remade someday, and only you can make it better.
When it came to being Bishop, especially in the first movie, in Aliens, how did you go about preparing for that one?
That was really something very, very... You know what? Before I did Aliens, I felt like I was doing movies, but I was only serving the film. What I mean by that is that I've studied a lot before I did my first film. And I wasn't doing the kind of work that I really know how to do, because I worked at it. And that is personalizing something and personalizing the people and everything else. With Bishop, I said, if I don't see the kind of work that I'm capable of doing on that screen, I'm going to walk away from acting. I'm not doing it anymore because I'm failing myself. So why not become a potter full time? Forget it. Forget the acting. And so one of the things I did was I tried to unravel it and say, how do you act an artificial person? How do you act an android? Well, all of the elements in the story they pointed in a direction where I said, you know what? When I was 12, adults had all the power. And I forgave them abuses or shortcomings and all of those kind of things because I knew I was going to outlive all of them. And also I knew that forgiveness is a cool thing. I mean, but anyway, that was part of it. So my emotional life was that of a 12-year-old through that whole role. And another element that would happen was that I felt very strongly that anything alive that was really living was absolutely fascinating to me and beautiful and incredible. And so those are positive things. I mean, all of the things that I picked out about Fisher were very human. And I didn't realize it. And I stuck with it. No matter what happened, I stuck with it. And I realized after it came out that people had seen Bishop as such an innocent and that my message had got across. And I saw it. I went, who the hell is that guy? I mean, by the time I was done, I was kind of amazed by what real thoughts can do on film.
It seems like that movie was such a great ensemble piece, but did you have to keep yourself apart from the rest of the actors physically as well as emotionally?
No, I felt, I never stopped working on it. I remember being in London and getting lost like a child, standing on a street corner in London going, I don't know where I am and I don't know where I'm going. I got to get back to my apartment, but I was lost. And I remember that feeling. And when I saw my friends, it was hilarious. I mean, it was like a reunion every time. So it became, I was really happy during that movie. I loved doing it. I loved playing that character. I really did. I remember going to England and Jim had called me and said, do you remember when we were kids, we played with a knife, between the fingers? And I said, sure, Jim, yeah, I used to play that. And so he said, well, that's how I'm going to introduce Bishop. I thought of a lot of different ways, and he told me the other ways. And he said, but that's the one. And so I started practicing with all these different knives, knowing him that I didn't know which one he was going to pick. And so I had a whole suitcase full of like throwing knives and switchblades and all of these knives. When I got to London, they opened my suitcase and there they were all laying on top, on a towel. And they told me, like, would you back away from your suitcase, please? And they had to come down and get me out of coming into the country. So it was all fine. But I said, I'm just an actor. And I think at that time the IRA was heavily involved in London. And so they were taking no chances. Poor Bishop.
It's always amazing to me that Terminator was just 2 years before Aliens. I mean, such a quantum leap. I mean, I love Terminator, but to see how big Aliens is compared to it is just amazing.
Yeah, the exponential rise of Jim Cameron's talent. It was there from the beginning, but everything is budgetary. You end up, I did his first movie with him down in Jamaica. Terrible movie, but we both want to forget it. But Piranha 2. Okay. But anyway, and then the jump from that one to showing more of his abilities in Terminator. But then when you see the jump to Aliens, it was incredible. Every dollar was on that screen. Every single dollar. It's not like he knew what he wanted and he knew what he was going to do. And that kind of talent comes from just a love of making films. I mean, that's it. I've never wanted to direct. I have no desire to direct, but I love to conspire. That's different. I want to conspire to do a good movie. But yeah, I've watched it in awe because really when I saw Avatar, I thought, oh my God, what a movie. In fact, the funny story was after I saw Aliens, we saw it over at Fox Studios, and I was absolutely stunned to the point where when we walked outside, I said, Jim, I really don't have any words at this moment. I mean, I'm going to write you a letter. And for years, he thought I hated the movie. The truth was I was stunned. I couldn't talk. It was so well done. And so I know how many parts he played in doing it. And he thought for years I hated it. And I said, no, Jim, I'm just too lazy to write a letter.
Yeah, you have so many nice moments in that movie. You were talking about the knife thing.
Yeah.
When it's done and you thank him. I love that.
You know what's really funny? Originally, it was meant to be that I just did it as a demonstration on myself. And right before we shot, I said, Jim, what if I put my hand on Bill's hand? Because he asked me to do it. And we do the knife trick, and I'm protecting him because my hand's over his hand. And that's how that went down. It was so much better. But this is conspiring because Jim liked it. But the other thing was I went to a buddy of mine who had been in a circus, and I said, I need to do something with that knife. And he showed me how to spin it in the palm of my hand. You grab the throwing knife and you spin it as you open your hand, and then you flip it over and grab the handle. I practiced that forever. I mean, and I finally got it. Because really it's right next to Bill's head, so I better do it right. So it was cool. It was really cool. It all worked. It was like, God wanted it to happen and wanted it to work.
And I love that other moment when you're looking at the face huggers and there's that, you were talking about the fascination that you had with all living things. And I love that can be kind of misinterpreted as Bishop is fascinated by the aliens. What's going to happen with that relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, there was other talk of Bishop being able to walk right through the aliens. They wouldn't pay any attention to him because he's not alive. He's not a living thing. And I thought that was really sad. But anyway, originally I had spent, I think, my last $1,500 on a pair of sclerals that would cover my whole eye. And I had put 2 pupils in each eye. And I did it on my own. And when I got to England, I said, Jim, I got something for you. And I said, it was actually during that scene. I said, Jim, if Bishop gets alerted to something or is really concentrating, that it goes pop and both. He has 4 pupils now. And he said, that's an interesting idea. And I said, yeah, I have the sclerals. I can do it. And so he said, all right, let's just do a test. So we did that scene. And when that guy came in and interrupted me, I looked up at him and I had 4 pupils in each eye. 2 in each eye. So Jim saw the dailies and he said, Lance, that's scarier than the fucking aliens. So we're not using it. It's shit.
Yeah, that does sound really freaky.
That's funny shit. But it's really true. I go through a period when I'm acting that I call gathering. I make no decisions, but I gather impulses and and maybe what I'm going to wear or an object that's important.
You don't tend to do a whole lot of sequels in your career, but you have come back to kind of the Bishop role a little bit, like through other means.
Yeah, but they're like different manifestations. It's pretty cool, actually.
Was it always a given that you were going to be in Alien 3 when that came out?
No, I don't think so. I think when they write about Bishop, it's usually like 4 a.m. and the writers are sitting around with a block and they go, well, what if we bring in Bishop in some, manifestation? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you kind of are a little bit of a deus ex machina at the end there.
Yeah.
I know this is a really dumb question, but I have to ask it anyway, and I apologize in advance. Was Bishop 2 a human or an artificial person?
I think he was an advanced model. Because one of the things that happened was that Fincher came up with that on the moment. And we didn't even have an ear. He wanted me to be hit in the head and have the flap open up. But we didn't have an ear. So Jack Nicholson had just finished The Joker. And they had a couple of his ears made of polypropylene or whatever it is. And we used one of those. So my left ear was big and my right ear was little. It was a little ear. But I thought, yeah, okay, if you're going to continually make an android or an artificial person, that they would advance it to the point where, okay, let's give him red blood instead of milk. So that was my rationale, you know. But I thought Fincher's idea was a good one, that you leave people guessing.
Your folks were actors. Did you always kind of feel like you were going to be an actor no matter what?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I made the decision to become an actor very, very early in my life, like when I was like 6 years old. And I say that to people, and they have difficulty believing that sometimes, but it's really the truth. In 1970, when I was 7 years old, my father won a Tony Award that year for a play on Broadway called Borstal Boy by the Irish poet Brendan Behan. And my mother had a show on Broadway that year, too, called Jimmy, about the late mayor of New York, Jimmy Walker. And, you know, I just, you know, used to soak it all up. And it was very clear to me, even at that young age, that I was going to be an actor. And then I never really considered anything else. And, you know, of all the things in my life, Mike, that's probably the thing that I'm most grateful for, because I really think it's such a tremendous advantage for a young person, and maybe not as young as 6 or 7, but when a young person knows what they want to do with their life, it's a tremendous advantage. One of my favorite plays is by the late great playwright Lanford Wilson, whom I had an opportunity to work with before his death, and he wrote a lot of amazing shows like Burn This and Bomb and Gilead, and he has one called Angels Fall, and in the play Angels Fall, one of the characters is a young tennis player, and he talks about the first moment that he realized he was going to be a tennis player, and he kind of stumbled, you know, onto a court, and there were a couple of guys playing, and he stood there watching them, fascinated, until they took a break, and they kind of left their rackets, you know, by the tennis court, and he walked over, and he picked up one of the rackets, and he started swinging it, and he said, from that moment on, I knew that this was me. This was what I wanted to do. And you know, once you know what you are, then the rest is just work. So I was lucky. I knew from a very early stage in my life what it was I wanted to do. So I didn't have to wonder. I was never lost. I was never, you know, adrift. I always had a goal, and I was going for it from really the very, very early part of my life.
Were you folks really encouraging of this?
They were, to a degree. I wanted to be a child actor, and my parents were not supportive of that idea. Their notion was, hey, you know, get an education, go to high school, graduate, go to college, and then if you still want this crazy business, then we'll help you. I didn't want to hear that. So, you know, when I was 14 years old, I was having trouble at school. I was a bit of a juvenile delinquent, so I got kicked out of a couple of high schools, and I ran away from home, and I went out to Los Angeles to try to break into the movie business. And I didn't really know anybody. I didn't have any contacts. So I ended up with a job at a screwdriver factory in Gardena, California, unloading trucks. And one day, my father tracked me down and, you know, showed up at the screwdriver factory. And the next thing you know, I was on a plane to Ireland to boarding school, to the same school that he had attended 40 years earlier. So they really they came around slowly, you know, to me becoming an actor. But by the time I finally did manage to graduate high school, and my mother, who was a very generous lady, who I just lost this year on Easter Sunday, and she felt me a lot because she was really an extraordinary lady. But she allowed me to go to college in France, and I went to theater school over there. I spent a couple of years over there, a couple of very good schools, and then I came back to the United States and began my career. And I never really looked back, you know. So at that point, they were willing, you know, to help. But I tell you what you discover pretty quickly in the business is that, you know, somebody, whether it's your parents or a family friend or something like that, they can get you a meeting. Do you know what I mean? They can kind of open the door. But it very quickly becomes up to you, do you know what I mean, and what you can do. I mean, the famous example that everybody uses is that, you know, Kirk Douglas had 4 sons, or maybe it was 5, I'm not sure. But they all wanted to be actors. But only one of them succeeded, Michael Douglas. And there are a lot of examples of that. You know, just because your parents, you know, might have been in show business does not guarantee you a career by any means. And it took a long time, My mother was a very beautiful woman. She was Miss Nebraska in the Miss America pageant, and she was a fabulous singer from a very, very, very young age. And so she kind of got snapped up right away. She was in the business only a short time before she was discovered by the great American songwriter Cole Porter and offered a lead in a hit show. And then she was, created the role in London and Kiss Me Kate and then did the television version, and she did films and all of this like she's still in her 20s. For me, it was a very different journey. I really had to work and to try to improve and continue to grow as an actor until the point where finally people started looking and saying, you know what, this guy is good. We should give him an opportunity. So it took much longer for me. But what can I say? I mean, I don't regret that. It would have been nicer if things would have, maybe come a little bit more easily. But at the same time, when you really have to work for something, it's sweeter in a way because you feel like you deserve it.
One of your early roles is definitely very memorable. In Creepshow 2, I still use your "this hair's going to get me paid and laid" line that you used in that one. Yeah. Though I definitely have a lot less hair than I used to. What was that experience like for you?
That was a crazy situation. I had auditioned to, I knew the original, the Creepshow, which had a kind of a respectable cast, guys like Ed Harris is in it, and I auditioned for the sequel to play like a frat boy. And then the director and the casting director said to me, would you consider reading for this part of this Navajo Indian? And I said, but I'm like a white Irish guy. How could I be a Navajo Indian? And they said, well, you have good cheekbones, and, we can give you makeup, and we'll give you a wig. They said, Burt Lancaster did it, and he was great, So I was like, when you're young and you've never been in a film before and you're dying to try to break into the movie business, you can get talked into a lot of things that would be harder to talk into now. But anyway, I looked at them and I said, but guys, the producer was in the room at this point, and I said, guys, look, I don't think it can work because I have blue eyes, and I'll never forget the producer turned and looked at me and goes, we'll make you a half-breed. We'll make you a half-breed. Okay. And that was sort of my baptism by fire into the movie business. But it's funny, it's a terrible movie. And I saw it not long ago for the first time in 20 years, and it really did not hold up well. But people still kind of get a kick out of it. And every once in a while, somebody like yourself, thank you, will bring it up and say, I really like this movie. And so I've come to terms with it. But not my most auspicious screen debut. And to be honest with you, it kind of hurt me because for a long time, people saw that. They didn't know me, and then they saw that performance. And, let's just say that it did not open up a floodgate of offers for me. It took me a few years to kind of claw my way back from that.
How did you get involved with Alien 3?
I was a young actor living in New York, and I got a call from a casting director who's still around, a very nice guy named Billy Hopkins. And he said that we're going to do another installment in Sigourney Weaver's, Alien series. And that this young director was somebody that was considered like a genius, that he had started his career, with 17 years old. He was an intern at George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic, and that he was, had directed, videos and commercials, and everybody thought that he was really brilliant. And of course, he turned out to be the very brilliant David Fincher. And so I came and read for David, and he offered me a part. And at first, believe it or not, I declined because in the original script, the only scene that my character, named Junior, one of the convicts, one of the we're not space monkeys, we're space monkeys in Fight Club. What were we in Alien 3? We were something else.
You're just space monks instead.
Right, space monks. There you go. So, he offered me this part, and when I read the full script, the only thing that this character really did was rape Sigourney Weaver. And look, when I play a character, I'm willing to play good guys and bad guys. I'm willing to play characters that are very dark, characters that But the thing was, it was the only scene that this guy had was this rape scene. When you had to go to England, you had to shave your head bald, and none of that really bothered me. But I thought, God, when they were asking for a 5-month commitment, I'm like, my God, I'm going to go to England and be bald and be there for 5 months, and all I'm going to do is this one scene where I rape Sigourney, and then I get killed, and I don't know. It just didn't seem like it was going to be particularly satisfying as an actor. Do you know what I mean? This kind of an assignment. And so I declined. And to his eternal credit, I got a call at home from David Fincher. He called me from England. He was already over there. And he said, listen, he said, I know that in the script that you have, his character only has this one scene. But, I just want you to know that I have you in mind for a lot of different things in the film, and I'm going to shoot with you a lot. And I think that you're going to have a great experience. So I was very impressed by the fact that he had gone to the trouble to make that kind of a call. I wasn't a big star or anything, needless to say. It was like my second movie, I think. So, anywho, I said yes. And I went over. And true to his word, David really used me a lot in the film. And I had a lot of very memorable scenes, including an incredible death scene, which did not make the final cut because, sadly, the studio stepped in and took the film away from David in post-production and recut it themselves. And any scene that did not feature Sigourney hit the floor. And frankly, it was a terrible tragedy because David is one of the world's great directors. And if they would have allowed him just to realize his vision of it, it would have been a much better film. He had the last laugh because he came back and made 7, which is a phenomenal movie. And then, of course, he made Fight Club, which is iconic. And since then, he has become, one of the most successful directors in Hollywood. But at that moment, that was his first movie, and he was kind of a young upstart. And I think the studio thought it was too dark, and they didn't get it, and they didn't like it. And so they took it away from him, and then and all of my scenes really, hit the floor, except for a few little, pieces. But the rape scene was still there. So, but I don't regret it. David hired me again a few years later for another one of his films, and, I consider him a friend, and that was kind of like, a first step for me toward, being in kind of bigger studio fare.
That kind of tension that was going on between David and the producers and everything, was that palatable on the set, or was that just something that happened kind of more towards the end there when they took the film over?
The tensions between David and producers, if I remember, our on-set producer was a gentleman named Ezra Swerdlow, who has gone on to work, although I haven't run into him for a few years, but I know that he remained in the film business and produced a number of films after Alien 3. But he and David seemed to have a good working relationship. I think that, to be honest with you, the British crew had their feathers ruffled a little bit by David. David, is a perfectionist, and he's very exacting, and he has a very specific vision, and he wants people to get it. And, while he has a wonderful sense of humor, and he's a very kind and intelligent guy, he's also a guy who, if you're not getting it, he can sometimes say things to you that, that are, he doesn't mince words. You know what I mean? He can be very direct, almost abrupt, and they didn't like it. So I sensed that the British crew, they make all this sort of elaborate formality over there. They're fancy footprints. They're very posh. They're not accustomed to that sort of thing. So there was a little bit of animosity there, if I recall. I mean, you're asking me to go back, 25 years, but that's my recollection. If there was some tension on the set, it was between a kind of a very visionary young American director, first-time director, and a British crew that was sort of bridling, under his, reins, kind of thing.
Well, it couldn't have been easy for him either, because the production had already kind of started when they brought him in, which must have made it really difficult for everybody involved.
I think so, but looking back, his greatness was apparent to anybody who was really paying attention, even back then. He's a very smart guy. And when you speak to him, you know, his intelligence and his style, and his taste, they're all very apparent. You know, he inspires a lot of confidence. But, you know, the problem is it was his first movie, so he didn't have a track record. So it was easy for them to kind of, well, it was harder for them to have that kind of confidence in him. Do you know what I mean? So everybody was a little bit like, you know, and then he was a little bit the enfant terrible. Do you know what I mean? You know, he was going to have it his way and knew what kind of movie that he wanted to make, and he has very strong ideas about things. And, you know, so, you know, I think that, yeah, there was some tension there, definitely.
You've worked with a lot of directors over the years, and you've been in a lot of things. How does Fincher kind of differ from some of the other folks that you've worked with? Because you've worked with them twice now.
They all have their own different personalities and their own different styles and stuff. David, he can be funny, and he's very witty. He has a very black sense of humor. He has a lot of charm, as opposed to a guy like, say, for example, Michael Mann, you know, who is less, although he has a sense of humor too in his own way, but he's less likely to be cracking jokes. You know what I mean? You know, more of a taskmaster. You know, a guy like Walter Hill is a very gentle, almost grandfatherly presence on the set. And yet, if he doesn't get what he wants, then, you know what I mean, then he can be very stern. But, you know, but they all have their kind of, their different personalities. David O. Russell is a brilliant but kind of quirky guy, you know what I mean? Kind of difficult to get a read on sometimes, in my experience. You know, I mean, they all, you know, I worked with Kasdan, I worked with De Palma, I worked with, I don't know, a long list of them, you know, and they just all have kind of different personalities or different styles. And as an actor, you know, the nice thing about the film business as opposed to the television business is that for an actor in the film business, you really have one person that you need to convince. You know, when you want to, you know what I mean? When you want to do something, do you know what I mean? Let's say you want to try something that isn't in the script, or you want to modify some dialogue, or you have an idea, something you'd like to, you really only have to convince that one guy. And if you can get that director, you know, to buy it, then you're in business. In TV land, the director has very little power. And so then it gets kicked up to the writer and to the producers and to network executives, and we have to call LA, and it becomes sort of like, you know, directing by committee. And I think that that's why a lot of TV isn't very good. Do you know what I mean? Because it's, you know, it's made by a committee.
What was your experience like on Fight Club?
It was good, you know. It was great to be back working with David. You know, by that time he was already established as this auteur director who, you know, the Prince of Darkness, they used to call him back in those days. You know, both Edward Norton and Brad Pitt were very, very hot at the time, needless to say. And Chuck Palahniuk's book was, you know, really popular, and we had an excellent script and an excellent director. And I think it was pretty clear to all of us that we were a part of something really special. You know, sometimes you're fortunate in that respect that you know while you're making it that you're making. Well, I mean, none of us, I think, really fully appreciated the degree to which the film would become, you know, a cult classic, if I can call it that. I mean, as a just gigantic cult following, Fight Club. I don't think we understood that, but I think that we knew that we were making something very different than what most of the studios were making, needless to say, and something special.
You definitely have one of the most memorable scenes in the film when you're spraying down the priest.
That was fun, you know. Like in Alien 3, although I have a little more to do with Fight Club, you know, the mechanic. Sadly, my one regret is that if you read the book, if you read Chuck Palahniuk's book, Fight Club, the mechanic, which is my part, is a much more prominent figure in the book than he is in the film. He's very much kind of a leader in the book, and in the film, sadly, he's more of a peripheral character. But it's still a film that I'm very, very happy that I'm in, and I think it's a great movie. Every actor wants to be in a great movie, and I remain very grateful to David Fincher, you know, for choosing me again. So I look forward to working with him again in the future. I don't know what it'll be on, but, you know, hopefully I'll get an opportunity to collaborate with him, you know, yet again on something.
Over the years, you have played a lot of cops, especially on TV, but just even in films, a lot of cops. Why do you think that you are the go-to guy for being detective or cop guy?
I think there are two explanations. One is a simple one, which is that, in Hollywood, anatomy is destiny. So, and that older generation of sort of very rugged looking guys that were leading men, I'm talking about the Bob Mitchums, do you know what I mean? And the Burt Lancasters and Kirk Douglases and people like that. The style changed, and we have a lot sort of kind of much prettier, almost more, I would say, androgynous looking, men, in the lead in many cases, not always, but many of them. So, I'm kind of like, not a classically handsome actor. I've always been a character actor. There's a tendency, I think, for them, to put me into those roles because they just see me fitting in there and more, easily. And then the second part of it is that the cop genre is one of the staples of American film and television. It's really, particularly in TV, it's kind of the ideal format, right? Because there's always a new crime that can be committed, a new criminal, a new killer that has to be caught. So the cop genre is a really, really popular genre that's kind of tried and true that the networks have made a lot of money with. So they keep doing them over and over and over again. And that's why you've had 4 Law and Orders and 4 CSIs and, innumerable different versions of innumerable types of cop shows. My problem with the genre at this juncture is that it's very hard to make it fresh anymore. It's like, you read these scripts and they just seem like so derivative of so many other things that you've seen before. That what at one time when I was younger was kind of one of my favorite genres has now in recent years I'm less enthusiastic about it because it's just done to death.
If you had your druthers, what would be your ideal role? What kind of movie would you like to be in, and what kind of character would you like to be playing?
I have a wide array of interests. There's so many things that interest me. I mean, look, when I got to play Lights Leary in Lights Out for FX, that was an example of something that I'd always wanted to do. I'd always been a big boxing fan. I wanted to play a boxer, and I wanted to do it while I was still young enough to be a credible, boxer. And then I had the opportunity, to do that, and I had a great experience. The show only lasted 1 season, but it was a critical hit. And, it too has a little bit of a cult following now. So, there are different, there are different kinds of, and it all depends, I just made a comment about the cop genre. That doesn't mean that somebody can't send me a script tomorrow to play, a police officer that's a completely fresh and inventive and new kind of take on what a cop's life is like. That could make me really, excited to be in it, and the same thing, with a soldier. But I guess I would answer your question in this way. One of my favorite writers was the late, great Norman Mailer. And he used to say that there are only 2 ways that a man can present himself to the American public. He will either be some kind of a warrior or some kind of a lover. Every character you will ever play will be at bottom some variation on one of those 2 themes. Now, obviously, I'm a guy who has played the warriors in our society much more frequently. But the characters that really interest me the most are the warriors who are capable of love, who have that dimension in them. So where he comes from, what he does, and what walk of life, he is chosen is less important to me than that he have that particular combination of qualities. Those are the characters that I search for.
What have been some of your favorite roles over the years, or maybe not even roles? What have been some of your favorite experiences as far as being on different films or shows? What are some of the favorites for you?
Yeah, well, I mentioned one of them, which was Lights Out. That was an amazing experience that I remain very grateful for to this day. I really had a lot of fun working on a film that I did, a World War II submarine movie called Below.
Oh, that was good.
A director that I like very much, named David Twohy. I had a good experience on a film that I did with Robert De Niro called Men of Honor, because it was a period piece about the Navy and about racism in the Navy in the early 1950s, and I got to learn to dive, in the old Mark V diving suits, and and I've since kind of like ever since those days I've kind of like continued to dive as a hobby, and recently I have a friendship with the grandson of the great Jacques Cousteau, a guy named Fabien Cousteau, and he invited me to go diving with him. He had this thing called Mission 31, where he took divers down to the bottom of the ocean, and they lived down there for 31 days, the longest period of time that divers have ever remained continuously submerged. And they're like they're ocean scientists and and activists and marine biologists, and they're brilliant people, and they study the effects of long-term saturation and the effects of the degradation of the coral reefs because of pollution and all these different things. But but he invited me to come down and spend a day down there with these amazing divers down on the bottom of the ocean. That's something that would never have happened, except way back in the 90s, I got a call to be in a movie with Cuba Gooding Jr. and Robert De Niro called Men of Honor. So I said, oh my God, I'm a diver. I better learn how to dive. I've never been done. So I went to dive school, and I found I loved it. And, and 20 years later, I'm diving with Fabien Cousteau, but I can trace it all the way back to that. So it's things like that. Do you know what I mean? It's that are unexpected. You play a part and you learn about a subject that you didn't know about, and you discover a passion in yourself that you didn't know was there, and you carry that with you for the rest of your life. It's like a gift that certain characters give you.
What do you get recognized for the most? When people see you on the street, what do they call out?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because the truth is that it really varies. It's a cumulative effect. For most actors, unless you really kind of make a big splash with one particular TV character or something, it's a cumulative effect. So it's after you've been in the business for many, many years, and people have seen you in a lot of things, then it's the cumulative effect of all that you've done that kind of causes them to remember you, to have that, So, I mean, sometimes it's from Fight Club, sometimes it's from Lights Out, but it can be for many, many things. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've been in a lot of different films and a lot of different television shows, and I'm always surprised. People come up to me and say, oh, I saw you in this, little indie movie called The Search for One-Eyed Jimmy. And I was like, oh my God, you saw that? Nobody saw that. And then they'll, start quoting the lines to me, so it really varies. But one thing that I have noticed the past few years is that I think I reached a little bit of a tipping point in my career, because I'm recognized very frequently now. And even as recently as like 10 years ago, it wasn't really like that. I would get recognized occasionally, but now I get recognized like daily. So it's different. And and the more famous you become, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. I remember reading an interview one time with Mel Gibson, and he said, look, I can't stand in hotel lobbies, because if I stand in the lobby of a hotel, that's going to become, an autograph signing session, do you know what I mean, within about a couple of minutes. And I understand, I have worked with a lot of celebrities. I remember one time I was shooting a movie, down in Arizona and Mexico with George Clooney. We were doing this movie called Three Kings for David O. Russell. And it was after work one night, and a few of us were at a bar in Arizona someplace, and people were coming up to get an autograph from George. And of course, George is very gracious, and he'll sign autographs for anybody. But it was really a lot of people. Like, one would come over, excuse me, Mr. Clooney, could you mind if I have an autograph? And then he would sign it. They would go away, and like 2 seconds later, that would be another person, almost like they were watching to see when the opening was so they could, And after like 40 minutes of this, and he'd signed, I don't know how many autographs, many. I said, God, George, wow, is this like what it's like all the time? I mean, it must get annoying, no? And he said, Holt, trust me when I tell you, the easiest thing, the best thing, the only thing to do is just to be very gracious and very polite and sign and say, sure, who is it for? Mary. Okay, here you go, Mary. Thank you so much. Nice meeting you. And then go back to your conversation. Because as soon as you say, listen, I'm very sorry, but I'm trying to have dinner with my friends. I'm not really signing autographs at the moment. Then that person is going to say, oh, but I've been a fan of yours for the last 20 years. I remember you from when, and now you're into a longer interaction than you would have been, you know what I mean, with the individual. So, you know, always just be polite, you know, sign and smile, and you know, and I really took that to heart, and that's how what I do too. But I'm doing a lot more of it recently than I used to have to do.
I have to tell you, I really liked you in The Losers. I thought that was a terrific film, and your role especially.
Well, thanks. I was working for Joel Silver, whom I've worked for in the past. You know, he produced a film that I have a small part in called Bullet to the Head, and I actually had the lead on a series for Joel back in the 90s. I think that they really believed that could be kind of a franchise deal for them. You know, they had a good cast. Chris Evans, who's become very successful. He's Captain America now. Zoe Saldana, Idris Elba. I mean, they really had like a good, very hot young cast. And I think they anticipated that they were going to kind of have the same kind of success that Sylvester Stallone had with his Expendables films. You know what I mean? Which I think he's made 3 of. And it didn't really happen, you know. And I can't really explain to you why. You know, Sylvain White is a very interesting director with a great visual style, a Frenchman. You know, I liked him very much. I already talked about, this great cast of actors based on a popular, graphic novel from France. You know, I had high hopes for The Losers. You know, I get killed in the first installment, so I'm not sure my character would have survived, would have been brought back for a sequel. But I expected it to do a lot better too. Yeah, you know, but that's how it is sometimes, Mike. You know, you sign on to these things because, you know, Gangster Squad was a very good example of that. A film I did a couple of years ago with Sean Penn and Ryan Gosling and Josh Brolin. You know, good actors, man, and you know, and a great eye concept, 1949 Los Angeles and the battle between the mob and the police. You know, I mean, Mickey Cohen, a famous, iconic character, you know, in American criminal history, and Chief Parker, who was the chief of police in those days, and this epic battle between them, between the Sean Penn and Josh Brolin characters. It should have been great. And it wasn't. It's not a very good movie, and it didn't do very well. And you know, and sometimes that's what happens, buddy. You know, you sign on to these things because it sounds like, oh man, wow, Sean Penn and Ryan Gosling and Josh Brolin, and we're going to be a gangster movie in 1940. Oh man, you know, you get all excited. And then the thing comes out and it tanks, and you go, oh well, I guess back to the drawing board.
What are you working on these days?
I just finished a film a few days ago called Shot Caller, which is by the director Rick Roman-Waugh, who you may remember did a wonderful prison film called Felon, and more recently a film that starred Dwayne Johnson called Snitch. And Rick wrote a very interesting script, which was really an indictment of our penal system and about what convicts have to do in order to survive in that really, brutal, violent world inside our penitentiaries. And so I play a convict. I play the head of the Aryan Brotherhood. And the fabulous Danish actor Nikolai Coster-Waldau plays a young executive, who is incarcerated for vehicular manslaughter because he'd been drinking and driving. And, not a guy with a criminal record, not a guy with any experience, dealing with, prison type, people. And then he gets behind bars and he realizes that in order to adjust to this new reality, in order to survive, that he's going to have to align himself with one of these gangs. So it's really kind of an expose about, the culture of white prison gangs in the California penal system and an indictment of our system and why so few people are actually rehabilitated. It's a very interesting film. He's a really smart guy, Rick Waugh, and I'm really happy to be a part of that one. I'm also in one that's going to come out in September called The Perfect Guy, which is a kind of a Fatal Attraction style thriller. I'm in a big action movie for kids called Monster Trucks for director Chris Wedge, who did movies like Ice Age and Epic. That's going to come out in the spring of 2016. I did a little indie film called White Space, which was kind of a sci-fi version of Herman Melville's classic Moby Dick. But that one has kind of been languishing in turn. It's a very expensive post-production job, and I think the producers ran out of money, so I'm not sure exactly when that's going to come out, but it's a very good film. So I do hope that it will eventually find an audience. And, I'm just living my life. I was asked to be on the jury of the International Film Festival in Brussels in the fall, and so I'm looking forward to that, I've been reading for some things. I read for part in the new Clint Eastwood film opposite Tom Hanks. Tom is going to play that famous pilot, Sullenberger, that landed the plane and saved all those people. Just going along. Not quite sure exactly what's up. They're actually talking to me about a French language film that would shoot in India with Gerard Depardieu's daughter, Julie Depardieu, and I'm kind of interested in that, because. As I mentioned earlier in this conversation, I went to college in France, so I happen to speak fluent French, and I've always wanted to make a movie. This one shoots in Paris and in India, and I think that would be interesting. There are some guys out there who seem to be able to work in different countries and in different languages. Viggo Mortensen is a good example, and I'd like to do that kind of thing too. So this would be maybe my first foray. So I think I'm going over to Paris to meet with the director next week, and that's it. That's kind of really all I have to report.
Back and we're talking about Alien 3. The film was plagued with production problems, including an openly hostile relationship between the film's eventual writer, producers, and director David Fincher.
Like I was saying, Fincher comes on, and unfortunately he's just getting so much shit from Hill and Geiler, and they are eventually the ones who write what becomes some of the final drafts of the script. So they have taken, they planted these seeds, and then they're kind of reaping what they sowed a little bit, trying to jam in that Vincent Ward stuff when they possibly can. And now these guys are both the screenwriters and the producers, putting poor David Fincher right there in the middle. First project that he's working on, first feature-length film for a major studio, and he's got these two a-holes on either side of him, just, picking on him all the time and second-guessing him, and it just, between them and the heads at Fox, it just turns into a nightmare. And it's one of those where it's like the rarity that Fincher talks about this thing, because it was just a bad experience for him.
Is he nowhere on the DVD at all for it?
I don't think so. He's definitely not on the audio commentary. It's like every once in a while I can find an interview with Fincher where he's talking about it, but he's still a major player in Hollywood. He's not going to rag on everybody that's involved. He's playing the political game and everything. Sure. This episode pretty much guarantees that we'll never have Walter Hill on this show, but what you gonna do? I'm okay with that. We've asked him on the show before. This isn't me getting revenge on Walter Hill for not coming on the show. This is me kind of trying to call him like I see him, because, you guys watched the theatrical cut, which was the version that they being the studio and these two guys, took away from Fincher, recut, I know they did a shit ton of reshoots, so they're working in England on the majority of the film, and then they start doing reshots out in Los Angeles. And if you watch the making of documentary, which I'm pretty sure you said you did, Brad,
Yeah.
you get this whole story of Sigourney Weaver's not going to shave her head again, so we're going to have to make up this crazy bald cap that looks like she has a shaved head, and just the amount of work that went into this, and then they had to do it again, and it's just like the cost overruns are going crazy. They cut out from the get-go. They told Fincher that he had, I think it was like 73 days or something to shoot this thing, which was less than the first or the second one. You know, obviously it's a much smaller film than the second one, but it's even less than the first film. They're cutting the budget like crazy, and they just keep second-guessing him, like, this guy's going to go over budget, going to go over time, all this kind of stuff. He ends up delivering his version of the film, I think, 3 days early, but then they want all these reshoots, so now he's late with it. And just the stuff that he has to go through to get the final version that comes out is just insane. And it, like I said, completely contentious.
And one of the things in there that I thought looked pretty cheap, and maybe this is just, you know, the benefit of now 23 years on, is that, like, the alien CGI stuff looks really bad. It looks really bad at distance. Like, of course, the animatronics and all the up-close stuff is fine, but, like, when it's off in the distance moving, it looks horrible. And, I mean, at the time, did you feel it looked horrible, or did it look pretty cool? I mean, this would have been the time, Jurassic Park was almost around this time with that CG stuff?
It looked horrible even back then.
Totally the same thing. I was having flashbacks of that when watching this again earlier. Like, it's so weird, because 1 minute you're watching this, it's like, this is like, the death scenes are really good here. Like, there's some good gore. There's some good animatronics here. There's the costuming looks cool. There's some really good shots of this alien, great blood splatters and stuff like that. And then every once in a while, there's this horrible looking CGI shot. When it first happened, I was like, am I accidentally watching like some pre-release cut of the movie or something like that? Like, why is this is continually going like, oh man, that's an amazing effect, to that's on par with like the ending of The Langoliers. Like, what is with the effects of this movie?
The flying meatballs.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Which is crazy, because you know that now, going out and watching any other David Fincher film, like I just watched the little thing on Zodiac, and there are hundreds of special effects shots in there that I would never even imagine are special effects shots. Fake blood, the way that the overhead camera goes down to the taxi cab, just all of these amazing things. I mean, the guy worked at ILM for years and everything, so he knows special effects. And yeah, this just looks terrible. And what kills me is that the first Alien looked fantastic because they knew to hide it in the shadows. The second, the Aliens and Aliens, those looked amazing because they know you work with close-ups, or when you work far away, you obfuscate. You do not show them walking around, that would just be like, hey, how's it going? This alien just kind of chugging around and stuff. You hide it, man. You do not have this thing in full view because, it just looked so nasty through so much of it.
Why did that even need to be CGI? He's just heading towards the door. Either put it in shadow or use the dude in the suit. Why did this need to be No, guys, no. This will work much better if it's a shitty CGI effect. Trust me.
Exactly. You call up that Nigerian dude, that 7-foot guy that weighs 90 pounds from the first Alien film. You put him in the suit and you just let him go. Let him do it, man. He can do his mime stuff, and he's fucking creepy in that outfit. And yeah, those close-ups, like that famous shot of Ripley with the alien coming in with the double set of jaws and everything, that looks fantastic because that's all just, the puppets.
Yeah, that looks fantastic in the up close. But the 2 seconds before it gets up into her face is one of those CGI shots that look ridiculous. So it kind of takes away from it.
Yeah, in the span of 10 seconds there with those two shots, it goes from looking like crap to looking like, yeah, I can see why they used this one shot in all the advertising for the movie. It's one of the best shots in the movie where she's got her head turned and the alien's all dripping with slime and shit, like right in front of the side of her head. Like, that's a really, really creepy and effective shot. And 5 seconds beforehand is this awful asylum-looking thing.
It is totally Asylum. What killed me, you talked about the advertising for this film, and the advertising is kind of crazy for this one because, you know, they were working on this thing way before. You know, they had ads and everything. This is talk about recipe for failure yet again. This was another film that was being made to hit a release date, and it didn't matter what was going on behind the scenes. It was all about that fucking release date. So they had the machinations of the publicity going, and they were, okay, we're going to have this out at a particular time on a certain day at a certain time. This movie's going to hit, and that's it. So they had this early teaser trailer, and I am just like bouncing off the walls around here trying to find a copy of this trailer on my original DVD, on the quadrilogy, on any of this stuff, because the original tagline for this movie, it was that going back to the first Alien and using the close-up of the egg, which was, you know, a tremendous advertising campaign for the first Alien, and it looks like the surface of a planet, and then you pull back and it's this egg, and the egg cracks and all this kind of stuff, and you've got the voiceover guy, and he's like, you know, blah, 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 and, you know, here comes Alien 3. Well, in the original teaser, he says, this time it's hiding in the most terrifying place of all. And I'm just like, oh shit, man, we're going to Earth. This is going to be amazing. The alien is going to come down to Earth, and this is going to be great. And that was one of the story ideas for a little bit, but they scrapped it. So now, if you go out and you try to find the teaser trailer with that on there, can't find it. I thought I was going fucking crazy. I had to go out and find a book that was all about teaser trailers and all about taglines for movies, and find like the teaser poster, and there it says it's hiding in the most terrifying place of all. And I'm just like, okay, so that's another reason I'm walking into this movie in 1992 and I'm thinking, oh man, we're going to go to Earth with this thing. This is going to be fantastic. No. The most terrifying place of all is inside of Ripley, apparently. And then what also killed me, sorry, I'm on a rant right now. What also killed me is some of these teaser trailers, they say,
the bitch is back.
Because that was the big line from Aliens, is when, you know, Ripley comes out with the, you know, the big mech costume, and the Queen is there, and she does the, you know,
get away from her, you bitch.
And so they show the alien, and it says the bitch is back, and then you watch the movie, and you realize that the alien is a male alien, and you're like, well, does that mean that the bitch is Ripley? This doesn't make any sense to me.
I've seen that teaser trailer for where it shows Earth. Is that really hard to find now? Because some years ago I saw that teaser on YouTube.
The one that has that line, it's in the most terrifying place of all, cannot find that anywhere. Like it's like the audio cuts out right after they show Sigourney Weaver's name, and there's no more voiceover. So it's got like another 20 seconds of sound effect, but no audio. So I have looked high and low for this thing on YouTube, on fan sites, all this stuff. So like I said, for a little bit there, I know I'm crazy, but for a little bit I felt like I was even more crazy, because I was just like, I remember this. Why do I remember this? And nobody seems to know this. And finally was vindicated by that book. But yeah, I still can't find the actual proof of it. And I would love to just be able to drop that sound clip in right here, but it's not going to happen.
I swear I've seen one also, maybe it's the one I'm thinking of, like where, yeah, total teaser trailer, it's showing Earth, and then the one that I'm thinking of, I thought I remembered it saying,
In 1992, we will discover on Earth, everyone can hear you scream.
Yes, that one is out there.
Okay, then that's the one I'm thinking of.
Which, again, leads you to think that it's Earth.
I remember the bitch is back one because I was 13, 14 when this came out, and I was like, whoa. I'm like, you know, Because you remember little things like that. But I had no clue as to what that reference was because I had never seen Alien 2. So I just remember that line in the teaser trailer.
I've never seen it. So watching it, having not seen Alien 2, you're like, is Elton John in the movie?
One of the nice things is that when they released that quadrilogy, we kind of got to see more of what David Fincher had in mind when it came to Alien. So they call that thing the assembly cut. In between there was a work print that was on VHS. I had it some years ago. I don't know if I still have it, but it's pretty fucking rough. I mean, it's really rough as far as like the sound quality and the picture and everything. The assembly cut looks great. They did a really good job of bringing it back. There's a couple points here and there where the audio isn't as good as it could be, but it kind of gives you a little bit more of what Fincher was going for. It was, I want to say it's like 145 minutes, whereas the cut that came out to theaters was about 115. So in that extra, if my math is right, 30 minutes, you get a lot more character development. Amazing, right? So you get a lot more of Clemens. You get a lot more of just the side characters. I mean, there's this whole thing, like what Holt McCallany was talking about earlier. You are missing almost his entire character. He's there to rape Ripley, and that's it. So in this reassembly cut, you really get more of that original vision. Now, I have been slagging this movie through the entire episode, and every once in a while, we will cover films that I actually like, and I will just point out all of their faults so people actually think that I dislike the film. I actually like Alien 3, but I will say that I like the assembly cut. I like that director's version of it. I don't love it, but I definitely like it. I like it more than Alien vs. Predator Requiem. I might like it more than Alien 4, possibly, but I really think that they did him such a disservice by taking the movie and cutting it down to what it was, that this version really hits a lot closer to home, and it's still muddled with some of those problems we talked about with the script and everything, but it's a lot more coherent than the version that we've been talking about for the last hour and a half.
I like it better than Alien 4. I like it better than either of the Alien versus Predator movies. There's things about this movie that I do like. I do like that even my problems with, like, you killed Charles Dance like 50 minutes into this movie, and he's easily probably the best character in this thing. Even with that being said, this is a movie where just people will just die. Like, whether it's beloved characters from a previous movie or someone that you're growing to like in this movie, they will kill off whoever the hell they want to in this film. I like a lot of the humor of the movie, like mentioning earlier with dude getting sucked up into the ceiling and then the reaction of that, and some of the kind of slapsticky stuff with the alien chasing them. I like that it's a very, very bleak looking film. I like that. Watching this movie, it feels like watching an Italian knockoff of an Alien movie that just happens to have Ellen Ripley in it.
There was an Italian knockoff, wasn't there? It was called Alien 2, I think was just the name of it.
There's that one, there's Alien 2 on Earth, and then there's also Bruno Mattei's Terminator 2, aka Shocking Dark, that honestly feels a lot like this movie. Very grungy looking, very foggy and dirty and scuzzy looking. Like it's like, oh man, like they are kind of taking it a step down from Aliens. Like, we're just skipping the regular movie, we're just gonna make the Italian knockoff. Why not? But I don't think it's as fun or as entertaining as the Italian knockoffs. But I appreciate that kind of bleakness, very, very low budget quality of the movie, despite issues I have. Like we mentioned the special effects, and we were talking about the Alien special effects earlier. But one of the worst ones I thought in the movie was at the end when she falls into the fire.
Which they had to shoot twice, man.
Yeah.
Because in one version, she just falls into the fire with her arms out like Christ, just hitting that for lack of a term, lava or molten metal, I guess is truly what it is, and disintegrating. And then in the other version, the chest burster bursts out and she holds on to it for dear life and then takes that to the grave with her. Why we needed to see that, I guess to just prove that she had one in her or something and to make us feel vindicated. But man, I talk about, bad special effects again right there.
You know what it reminds me of, and it's so much better done, of someone falling into the fire, and even with like sort of kind of cheap looking effects in the same era, is Ian McKellen's Richard III. Because he falls into the fire at the end, if you remember at the end of that film. And it's so much better, than it's done here. And like I said, the whole thing of her holding on to it, it's just like, I think that's one of those jab the audience in the ribs with your elbow just to make sure they get it.
I honestly thought you were going to mention Terminator 2.
I thought he was too.
I totally thought you were going to mention Terminator 2, because
not me. I'm too highbrow. That's the problem.
That was an ending that does this way better than Alien 3 does. For me, Alien 3 felt really anticlimactic for a couple different reasons. One, I don't know. There just wasn't a lot of weight to me when she died. It was kind of like just sort of like ... and then she dies, and then Bishop 2 comes in. And he's giving her this speech and everything. And I'm like, man, if you were really hell-bent on her getting her, like, back on board your ship so you can get this alien out of her, why didn't you just show up and shoot her with a tranquilizer dart, throw her over your shoulder, walk back up onto your ship and leave? You did this convoluted plan where you're trying to talk her into it, and shit, that failed.
Rush her. Just rush her before she gets to that gate. You got a whole bunch of guys there. Just, there you go. Run up. Yeah.
And then poor Charles Dutton sacrifices himself. I'm like, why does Charles Dutton need to be the one to sacrifice herself? Why not let the woman who's been trying to kill herself for the past 30 minutes, let her do it?
Yeah, she's asking him, hit me over there with a pipe. Do whatever you want to do. Just go ahead and kill me. It turns into almost like a slapstick skit.
Well, the whole thing is, it then becomes, and maybe I missed it somewhere in here, at least in this cut, how do you have another film out of this? Because I'm like, she's dead, everything's dead. The person that left who was there was what? The crazy guy. And unless he's infected, it's like, where's your sequel? I don't understand where it kind of goes from there.
Clones, dude.
Yeah, that's lame. I'm sorry, that's lame. That's a cop-out.
No, dude, it's not. Not only is she a clone, she can play mean basketball, too.
Fuck yeah.
Not even kidding. Have you not seen part 4?
No.
Oh, man, she plays basketball better than Kurt Russell in Escape from L.A.
She goes one-on-one with Ron Perlman, man.
I'm shaking my head over here. I'm sure you can hear it, and the eyes are rolling, too.
If anybody wants to know what might have happened, this is kind of like what the Watcher from the Marvel Universe. What if Newt and Hicks survived? There's two things. There's a fan film that's being made right now where we kind of are erasing 3 and 4 and all the other ones, and we've got Hicks and Newt, especially Newt, in it. But for my money, I haven't seen the fan film yet because it hasn't been made. It's just in the pre-prod stage right now. For my money, the best thing to do is go read the Aliens comic books. And these things, you can find the originals. They're not too difficult to track down, where Hicks and Newt survive. Then once Alien 3 came out, they had to re-release them where they've changed the name of Hicks and Newt to Nix and Hoot. No, I'm just kidding. They had to change the names of these characters, but basically the guy looks like Michael Biehn and the little girl looks like Carrie Henn. So yeah, it's not too hard to figure out that these are supposed to be these characters. So let's take our final break in this episode, and we're going to play an interview with Mark Verheiden, who was the one who provided this alternative to the movie mayhem of Alien 3 with the Dark Horse Comics version of Alien. How did you get started in comics?
I always loved comics. I was a collector when I was a kid. Actually, I still have a pile of them around here. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and so in Oregon in the 70s when I was growing up, there really wasn't any sort of outlet to figure out how you could actually do that. So it seemed a bit like a pipe dream. But I also always wanted to write movies, and I moved to LA in 1983 to try to break into the film and television business. Of course, right after I moved away, my ex-roommate and an old friend of ours started Dark Horse Comics. And they said, Mark, you're a good writer. Would you like to try to write something for us? And so I wrote a book called The American, which was the first comic book I ever wrote, which they basically bought and printed. About a year after that, Dark Horse got the license for Aliens, and they were looking for a writer for it, and I sort of insisted I should be that writer because I loved Aliens. But that's how I broke in, was that I sort of knew a lot of people who also wanted to break in, and as they started to break in, I sort of climbed in with them.
The American, it looks like that came out in about 87. It looks like by 88 you were already kind of working in movies. I'm seeing your name on as a story credit on The Terror Squad. Is that right?
You don't have to go too far into that one. When I first moved out here, one of the very first things, a friend of mine who worked down here was a sound editor, producer he was working for, a super low-budget producer, needed scripts. And long story short, I did a draft of this thing, Terror Squad. The movie itself does not resemble that draft. I think the only thing that's left practically is the basic premise and the title, which was mine. Well, I'll take that. So yeah, I was trying to break in at the time, but into the movie business, but I ended up detouring into comics. I did, like 100 or so comics, maybe a little more, for Dark Horse, and quite a few for DC then too. But people responded to The American. People really responded to the Aliens books. And so that led to getting more work, the Predator books. I did a series for Marvel. I did the Time Cop book. And those all sort of dominoed into the movie and television thing.
When it comes to Alien and Aliens, I imagine, did you see Alien when you were a young man?
I saw when it came out, absolutely. Yep, and Aliens. Well, I thought Alien was a great horror movie. I always differentiated between the two. I thought Alien was a great horror movie. I thought Aliens was a great action movie with horror in it. But they were very different creatures. It sort of dovetails into when I started working on the comics. When I knew Mark Nelson was going to draw the first series and saw his work, which is very brooding and creepy and unsettling, I made a conscious decision that this should be a horror comic, that let's go for more for the kind of scary look of it, as much as we could. I mean, there was action in the book, but I wanted to steer it more to his strengths, which I think were really the creepy elements of Alien. And then when Denis Bouvet came on for the second series I did, his stuff was in color and it was very vibrant. I went much more for an action story, I think, in that second series. And sort of kept that up with Sam Keith, who did the third series.
Did you originally have to do kind of an adaptation of the second film, or did you just kind of pick up where the second film left off?
I look back on it and I go how did that actually happen? Because since then, with a bit more experience in different worlds, I've seen how sort of oppressive it can be to work on a licensed property, and how the rights holders can be very, very, and rightfully so, but they can be very, very hands-on. With Aliens, the whole thing was we're going to spin off from the movies. We weren't going to do an adaptation. We were just going to spin off. And it was sort of like, what do you guys want to do? And so working with Mike Richardson and Randy Stradley at Dark Horse, we came up with some ideas. I sat down and did an outline, and that became the first 6-issue series. I don't recall more than maybe 1 or 2 notes from Fox. I have to caveat that by saying I was not the editor of the book. I don't know if they had more notes, which they weren't telling me, but they gave me those notes that they said were from Fox. So they were obviously very happy with sort of where the book was going creatively, and then I assume they were happy with how well it was selling and keeping the franchise sort of active, and that it was doing really well in the marketplace. But yeah, it was a very creatively just a great experience in the sense of they really let us, once I think they knew where we were going and liked what we were doing, they just said, God be with you, go for it.
Do you remember what some of that feedback from Fox was when it came to the series?
There was a woman there, and I've forgotten her name, who was our direct liaison. I may have talked to her once or twice. You mean in terms of notes? I think it might have been, there was one note about a nudity, possibly, in one thing, I think. And I think there were a couple of thoughts about too violent. But, again, it's been a long time ago. That's sort of what I remember. I don't recall any substantive notes, like they shouldn't be on Earth, or, don't do this, don't do that. We did have a couple of fairly major things that were given to us when we walked in. And one of the big things that was given to us that we could not do in the first series was use Ripley. So that was right off the bat. You could not use that character because it was some likeness issue, I think. So that was the reason Ripley was not included in those. But that cleared up by the time we got to the third series, and we were able to bring Ripley back into the story. That sort of dictated how that story went.
Where were some of the places that you took Hicks and Newt and where you kind of picked up Ripley from?
We picked up in the first book basically Newt and Hicks. Obviously, these were done before Alien 3. But we picked those characters up 10 years after the events of Aliens. And so Hicks has been horribly scarred and left sort of a pariah. People don't want to even touch him because they're afraid he might be infected. And Newt's basically in a mental institution being tranquilized just because of the trauma of her situation. And from that, I just wanted to do a story about sort of the madness of the military and of Earth people, and this idea of both a religious organization that begins to worship the alien creature as a superior animal, and also of the military, which is basically picking up on themes that were in Aliens, the movie, the military wanting these things as to weaponize them. Those were sort of the two big plot lines, ran pretty much through the series, which is basically, if I have one thing that goes through a lot of my work, it's that we're our own worst enemy. And so in the Alien series, that proved to be quite true. And I also like the idea of playing and sort of extrapolating somewhat on the androids, the bishop of it all, and how that would actually impact on sending squads into space. It really didn't, when you think about it, doesn't make too much sense to send real humans into space if you have perfect androids that look, that do everything humans can do, if those are able to go. So I play a little bit with that, and the fact that these androids think they're human and don't know that until they're ripped in half and stuff like that. So those are some of the thematic things we were playing with.
You kind of went balls out right from the beginning with taking the aliens back to Earth, which I really appreciated.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that was a decision we made right off the top. That was done with Mike and Randy. It was like, let's bring them to Earth. We wanted Newt and Hicks. We couldn't use Ripley. And from there, I think, it was about inventing the fun science fiction conceits around that. I actually was just rereading it today. I haven't read it in a while, and there's a spooky thing. Actually, I have a reference to the World Trade Center going up in the first period. So I'm like, oh, okay. And also, I think there's an early sort of point about how television has evolved into 5,000 channels. By the way, this is back when cable was just starting. So the idea that there's all these channels and people are scanning them all the time, looking, and people are trying to find a way to grab your eye to hold you more than 15 seconds because that's how they get paid. That turned out to be a pretty good guess, too, but which was all that was, just guesses. They were really fun to do.
So the publication starts in 1988. When do you start hearing rumblings that there's going to be a third Alien film, and how does that affect the series?
Well, I don't recall, actually. I think we finished all three of the first books. Basically, back then, I think they were called Book 1, Book 2, and Book 3, but then I think now they have names. We'd finished those before Alien 3 came out. I do remember going to see Alien 3 in the theater and kind of going, whoa, that's sort of, wow. And it's funny, I think I think David Fincher is obviously an amazing director, and with time, I'm actually I kind of like the ball that was involved in killing Newt and Hicks, essentially before the credits finished rolling in that movie. However, as an entertainment experience, and as it's so negative and such a downer that, I think to this day, I haven't seen it again in a while. Aliens was such a fun movie, such an uplifting. They saved Newt, and it's just great. It's just fun. And then to sort of negate all that by immediately killing them just felt like, wow, that's a slap in the face at someone, or an intentional, this isn't your father's aliens, I guess, sort of motif. So I was disappointed in that one, I have to say.
So I take it there was no talk of maybe bringing you on board and taking a crack at one of the scripts for this? No?
I wish. No. I think Dark Horse may have suggested, but at that point in our careers and at the time, they were all going to do their thing. And you have to remember back then, too, these books came out before, and I want to get the time right, I think it came out before the first Batman movie came out, the Tim Burton movie with Michael Keaton. And, before that, comics were still sort of ugly stepchildren. I can recall when I was starting my screenwriting career, having some meetings where the knowledge that I had done comics was not helpful. Obviously, how it has changed. I'd take meetings, and you could tell that the executives, who were often older fellows and stuff, would sour when they said, "What's your background?" I said, "Well, did these aliens comics?" That's comics. I ran into that some.
Yeah, how times have changed, definitely.
Yeah, no kidding.
Were you still around working on these when they had to go back in and change the name of Newt and Hicks to other names?
They told me they were going to do that. Look, if it keeps them in print and everything, those guys are all friends of mine. It's fine with me. I prefer the originals. I think they're true to what the story was. If you're into the aliens mythology, I hope you'd be able to divorce those other movies, 3 and 4 and whatever's come after, and be able to say, okay, this is one sort of dimension of where the story could have gone if Newt and Hicks hadn't died. Those other movies go off in a different direction, and that's sort of, I think you'd be able to figure that out maybe, but I also understand the commercial impulse and to do that, and so again, it kept them in print. I think if I have an issue is that they colorized the first one, which was never meant to be in color. I don't think it looks very good. That's just me.
Yeah, that's got to be weird to go back in and add color to something that was drawn with the intent of black and white.
Yeah, his stuff is so detailed, and it's the duo shade work that Mark Nelson does and the fine ink work. Putting color on it, it just wasn't designed for it. I think whoever did it did as good a job as they could, but it just wasn't designed for it. Again, I understand the commercial reason for that. I'm sort of a mind that the originals are out there if you want to see them. The original compilations are out there if you want to see them. You can still find them all over the place. So those are the additions I prefer to the newer ones.
Have you been keeping up with this whole thing with Neil Blomkamp and his kind of vision of what aliens could be?
Yeah, I saw that. Looks cool. I'm a fan of his, and so, bringing Newt and Hicks back. I don't know if I've seen Newt in these illustrations. I did see the Hicks one where he's deformed and looks a lot like the Hicks we had in our comic. Great. I think the world is ready for another great Aliens movie. I don't want to put down Alien 3 or Alien Resurrection. They weren't particularly my cup of tea, though, and so it'd be great to see someone sort of reinvigorate the franchise.
How much longer after working on Aliens did you stay in the comic business before kind of breaking full-time into just working on the production and the writing work when it came to films and television?
I kind of transitioned over 3 or 4 years. It's not a secret. The bottom sort of fell out of comics around 1992. Sales just plummeted across the board. So, but I had already been transitioning. I'd written, I sold I got the job to write the screenplay for Time Cop, I think in 1990 or 91. Did a rewrite on The Mask, the Jim Carrey movie. That was 91, I think. So I was already transitioning out as comics were going through a sort of a rough patch. Just to give you an example of the rough patch, because it's specific, I think I ended up hearing that the first would have been 6 + 4 + 4, so the first 14 issues of Aliens, which were the first 3 series I did, sold somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million copies. Later, and maybe they sold more since then. Later on, I was doing I did a Predator series too, which also sold in that ballpark. They were selling 300,000 or 400,000 an issue. And the second Predator series I did was selling 30,000. that's the drop that happened in just a matter of a couple of years. Look, I don't want to pretend I had any great prescience about that. I always wanted to do film and television. I was always trying to break into that. In fact, writing the Predator comic series led to me selling my first feature, because I ended up selling The American, which I had also done for Dark Horse. I ended up selling that to Warner Brothers and wrote that script. It never got made, but I was able to break into the screenwriting business and sort of jumped into what I've always thought I wanted to do, which I've now been doing for a while.
It's funny, though, how you've kind of stuck with comics a little bit as far as the writing stuff goes, working with Smallville and Heroes, and now working on Constantine. I mean, it's funny how the business kind of came back to you almost.
Look, it's been great. It's amazing. It's amazing how it's come around. 20 years ago, the idea of Avengers movies would just be unimaginable. The idea of this incredible Marvel universe with giant movies coming out and making $500 million a piece, that's just unimaginable. And so, I grew up on the Avengers and the Fantastic Four and the DC universe, and I grew up on all that stuff and still like it. And so to see that happen has been great, but it's been great just from a creative standpoint, because I love that stuff. And so I think the love that I have for that's translated into me being able to work on a variety of projects, comic-based or science fiction, like Battlestar Galactica and Falling Skies. I don't know, maybe it's a bit of luck in that everything sort of turned like that when I happened to be available to do it. There were a lot of comics writers even 20 years ago that couldn't really break in because of the stigma still attached to comics. It was just tough. So anyway, it's wild and woolly times. It's great.
I have to tell you, I love a lot of your work, but I just wanted to especially call out, I love Time Cop. It's probably my favorite Van Damme film, and I really love My Name is Bruce.
Oh, well, now you're talking. No, that's great. I'm glad. My Name is Bruce was, Time Cops obviously is a special affection because that was the first one that got made. But My Name is Bruce is a total labor of love. Bruce and I and the Dark Horse guys did that for no money, just for fun, and that was really fun to do. I wrote that while I was working on Battlestar. The funny story is Battlestar won a Peabody, and we went to New York to go to the Peabody Awards. And a week later, I was on set with Bruce, and he's kicking a handicapped man across the street, and in this idiotic movie I wrote. And I said, "Wow, I have quite a diverse career." It's supposed to be funny. He was a mean handicapped man, but it.
That might be my favorite part of that film too.
You're just as sick as I am.
Bruce playing against type so much in that. I mean, whenever I've seen him, he's always been so generous to his fans, and then when he just plays a dick in that movie, it is so good.
I was sort of surprised he agreed to do it. I mean, but he got into it. I mean, he pulls his own movies out and makes fun of them. So he was really on board with that. He's a great guy. We keep talking about wanting to do something else together again, and that would be fun. He's a busy man, though, so.
Back and we're talking about Alien 3, and we got just one more thing to talk about. The movie, as it stands. Maybe in the original version. Maybe it's that assembly cut. Maybe it's the fan edit. Is any of it worthwhile? And also, how does it stack up against the other films in the series? So, gents, I'll tell you right now, I've seen now the first Alien, I've seen the third Alien, and I guess I've seen the fifth one, because I've watched Prometheus. So, but I guess that's the 0 hour Prometheus, right? Isn't that the prequel? So I am, I will admit my ignorance. I have not watched the entire series, and therefore I should probably reserve judgment. I'll just say that I like the first one.
The first one being Prometheus?
No, the first one being the Ridley Scott film.
Well, Ridley Scott did Prometheus too, so.
Oh, you got me. Okay, no, the one back in the 70s.
There we go. All right. People have kind of now tried to reassess this film, and like me, a lot of them are like, oh, well, the assembly cut is the way to go. You have to watch this one and forget about the theatrical cut and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of reassessing of this movie, and I'm not sure if it's sincere or if it's one of those things like, you know, like the hipsterism where I only like the super rare version of this particular film and blah, blah, blah. Like, I only like 2001 with the original score. I don't like the classical music. I mean, you can't get much more hipster than that. So is Alien 3 the theatrical version or the assembly cut or whatever? Is it worth a look, or is this the same opinion that you had after seeing Alien 1 and 2, that it's dog shit, or was it more the opinion of, hey, this is a good slasher film in space?
I think it's an okay slasher movie in space. I don't think it's total dog shit. I don't, because I don't think this movie is. I think it's worth watching. I do. I don't think it's one of those that's so bad you just got to freaking avoid this thing. I would suggest to watch the assembly cut instead of the theatrical version. In watching the theatrical version, knowing stuff that's missing is a little distracting. It makes everything feel really, really rushed. And also things just leave the movie. Like, dude going crazy in the straitjacket, and then suddenly he's not in the film anymore. The ending is a little less rushed and looks a little bit better than it does in the theatrical version. But I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, think that this is some kind of undiscovered masterpiece, or like this is a movie that was misunderstood in '92, but nowadays it's a total gem. Like, no, I don't think that. I think that as a slasher movie in space, the assembly cut is so much more complete than what you'll see in the theatrical one. But there is good gore here. There are good characters. The death scenes in the movie are fine when it's not cutting to the CGI of the alien. There's a lot of stuff that works in this. I think it's a good looking film. I think it's grungy. I think it's dark as hell. I think it's gritty. I would rather watch this than 4. So I don't think that it's just a heaping pile of junk that you got to avoid at all costs. Like, I'll reserve any kind of heavy criticism like that towards like Alien versus Predator, Alien versus Predator Requiem, which I think are far worse than this. This at least has like good qualities to it.
Well, it was enjoyable for what it was. Like I said, not being one of these people who saw it in context of 2, I thought it was serviceable. I think there's cliche elements. Like I said, the whole characters that aren't really developed and all that stuff. But like I said, the more that you learn about what's missing, it's okay. Like I said, I won't be in a big rush to watch it again. The only thing that, like I said, I found interesting about it, having just seen Fury Road recently, is that it almost kind of feels like, at times, some sort of like, suburb to the Mad Max world, with the whole sort of prison planet and their, faith. So it's kind of interesting in that way when I watch it.
I think this 100% feels like more like a Riddick film than it does an Alien movie. Like, it looks and feels like a Riddick movie. So honestly, like, if you really, really dig the Riddick movies, which I kind of do, you will probably find stuff you'll like about this movie.
I might have given the wrong impression that the assembly cut is hard to find. It's actually easier to find than the original theatrical cut these days. When I was going out and looking for this, luckily I still have my theatrical cut on DVD, but when I was looking for this, I think it's available on Amazon streaming, but both versions are available on Amazon streaming. So it's really kind of tougher to find the shorter version than the longer version.
Well, the files you sent me one that said assembly cut and then one that just said Alien 3. They were exact same files in terms of length, so they were both the assembly cut. I actually had to go to Amazon and pay my $3 to watch the theatrical cut that way because I didn't have the files. So I was looking at the other file you sent me, and I think that must have been some sort of fan edit or something. There was one that was like 3 hours long, and then there was two that were like 2:30 or something, 2:20, and then the theatricals just shy of 2, so it's like 150 something. So that's the one that I had to buy off the Amazon streaming.
Yeah, I think I watched 5 different versions of Alien 3 in preparation of this particular episode, so I'm kind of Alien 3'd out. So I really am, that's the other reason why I'm hypersensitive to all this stuff as we're talking about this, is because I've kind of overdone it on Alien 3 over the last couple of weeks between the theatrical, the assembly, there's a fan edit called the reassembly, there's one called, I think, the Q2 or something. There's quite a few different versions out there. That 3-hour one is actually a reassembly, which kind of meshes the theatrical plus the assembly cut together, and then has all of the outtakes and the differences, and they even have the a couple things that weren't available in the assembly cut that were available in that work print that I was talking about. So it's very comprehensive, but I have to say that I don't care for the cut that they put together, because I actually like the one better that starts with Charles Dance out on the planet's surface, which is funny too, because this is yet another one of those, talking about trailers, this is another one of those movies where you watch the trailer, you get used to the trailer, especially me when I'm working at a movie theater and I'm seeing the trailer, dozens and dozens of times a day, and I'm seeing Charles Dance out there and I'm hearing the voiceover,
In a world where the sun burns cold and the wind blows colder.
And I see all that stuff, and I see him find Ripley, and I see him running back and all this stuff. None of that's in the movie that I go see. I'm just like, what the hell? What's going on here?
I hate it when that happens.
Which is kind of crazy, too, because just that opening, that they had to redo the opening, was so strange, because, you guys probably know this already, but by showing Hicks, like that picture of Hicks that comes up at the beginning, they don't have one of Newt, but they have one of Hicks. Michael Biehn insisted on being paid because his likeness was being used, and he says in the documentary about the making of the film that he got more than the first one. I don't know if he means then when he was in Aliens or the first movie that he ever was in, kind of thing. So, but he definitely got paid. He got paid to have his picture used there, which is weird because that other opening, they don't show him necessarily. So it's like, why are you doing that? Paying this actor who doesn't want to be in the movie, who's pissed off that his character got killed off, which I completely understand. But, you got to do that so you can not have the ox have the baby. I don't even understand some of this stuff. So some of those decisions were just so bizarre that you watch the opening 10 minutes of both of these films side by side, and you're going to say, why did they have to change that? This doesn't make any sense.
And also Michael Biehn saying in the same interview when he says, what if I knew David Fincher was going to go on to be David Fincher? I would have been like, okay, sure, you can use my likeness.
Right. Just put me in your next film, David. Yeah, Rob, I really have to recommend that you go back and you watch Aliens. It is one of my favorite movies of all times, and it is just such a departure from either one of these films that it is just amazing, and such a terrific cast. I mean, that to me is probably my favorite James Cameron movie. I mean, you can keep your Avatars and your Titanics and all that kind of horse shit. Just give me Terminator and Aliens. That's all I need. I don't even need Terminator 2. Just give me those two films. And if I had to choose, I would choose Aliens over Terminator, because that is the one I go back to. That's the one I quote from all the fucking time. I mean, anytime somebody's having cornbread, I'm dropping a line from the movie right there.
Guess you don't like the cornbread either.
You know what this is, really? I mean, me on the show this week, it's kind of funny. If you go back and you listen to the Fire Walk With Me episode, this is exactly that sort of fish out of water that I've put myself in this way. Because, and I actually think that it might actually be an instructive way to do this film in this week. Because, if you go in cold, I'm basically, I guess, your version of it. Like when I watched Fire Walk With Me and I'm like, I kind of know a little bit about Twin Peaks, I guess. Here's what I'm getting. And you guys would just sit there and giggle at me because you're like, oh, there's so much you don't know. So, hey, that's cool.
Robbie, you are the control group.
I am. This is a scientific experiment and I am the control group. So, you know what? More than happy to do it.
No, I definitely appreciate that you don't have this history with the franchise because it is fascinating to me to hear your take on this stuff, especially, like, I don't think you've said Newt one time, but yet every time that Brad and I talk, we say Newt, Newt, Newt. We're all about Newt, and you're like the little girl. And that's fascinating to me because you have no history with that character. And I don't even think they say, well, they might say Newt once or twice in Alien 3, but if they do, I can't even remember the line. But she is nobody to you, which is fascinating to me. So I'm so glad that you were able to be kind of our sacrificial lamb on this one.
There's only 2 references to Newt for me. One is from Holy Grail. She turned me into a Newt. I got better. And then Newt Gingrich. And to be honest, I'll pick being turned into a Newt rather than hanging out with Newt Gingrich.
Why are these 2 guys so upset that they killed off Newt Gingrich in Alien 3? That sounds like a good thing.
All right, so now it is time to take our final break, and we're going to play a preview for next week's show.
Well, I think Harry would like me to leave.
Well, I don't think that's necessary.
I think Harry thinks it is.
Harry thinks if you call him Harry one more time, he's going to make you eat that cat.
Gene Hackman is Harry Mosby.
Hello, Harry.
In Night Moves.
Well, come on, take a swing at me, Harry, the way Sam Spade would.
He's a private investigator.
Fly her to Delhi. Or would you believe Delilah? Well, she's gone.
How long gone?
2 weeks. Go find her.
Making a living.
Well, let's say 125 a day and legitimate expenses.
From other people's lives.
You can get cheaper.
Can I get better? You're hired.
Making a mess of his own.
God, you're really prime, Ellen, you know that? I catch you screwing another guy and you attack my lifestyle!
Your lifestyle has nothing to do with it!
Night Moves. It's a mystery.
I'm looking for Deli Grassner. Deli isn't around here anymore.
Where the suspects are also the victims.
I want to know what I walked into. Ask your wife.
Well, are we going to talk about it?
But it's your ball, run with it.
Where the questions.
All right, what's it all about, Mosby?
Is there still much smuggling going on around here? The dogs have fleas.
Where were you when Kennedy got shot?
Have too many answers. Where every clue is a lie.
I've been listening to your ping-pong talk long enough. What was in Marv Elman's plane? Drugs? Was it drugs?
Night Moves.
Check. Check.
Ah, it's a beauty.
It's a game where every player is a pawn.
Harry Mosby, isn't it?
Every move is a wrong one. And the winner loses everything.
I want to know what it's all about.
I told you what it's all about.
You, what the hell are you all about?
You're asking the wrong question.
Gene Hackman in Night Moves.
That's right, we'll be working on The Night Moves next week when we discuss the Arthur Penn neo-noir film. Before we go, I'd like to thank this week's special guest as well as our guest co-host, Brad Jones. Now, Brad, is it true that you're truly a cinema snob?
In real life, no. I just play one on the internet. I don't know how many. I don't know how many Cinema Snob's favorite movies are Caligula and the Toxic Avenger.
Well, I can't think of too many other podcasts that would cover both of those. So, tell us more about Cinema Snob. What do you do over there?
I run the cinemasnob.com. I play a character called the Cinema Snob, who's kind of this highbrow critic. It just kind of riffs on some like WTF Hollywood movies, old exploitation movies, but from a satirical point of view of this kind of stereotypical cinema snob, like elite movie goer, art critic kind of character. But we do a bunch of other stuff over there too. We go see pre-releases for all the new movies that come out, and we shoot the shit about them in the car afterwards, and just, you know, the group of us, we get together every week and talk movies. But we also do animated series as well. We have an animated series called Lloyd about a private detective cat. We have original movies over there, like a 80s cop thriller we did called Midnight Heat. So if you don't like one series of things that we do over there, then there's plenty of others to choose from.
What is this whole thing Brad Tries?
Oh, the food show. I'll tell you exactly what that is. That is, I should get a video posted this week, and this particular series only takes about 10 minutes. That's a show in which I taste different things. Like, it's a total vlog series. It's like, I've got this 30-year-old bottle of new Coke. Let's see what that tastes like now. Or Crystal Pepsi, or foreign Pepsis like Pepsi Cucumber and Pepsi Mint and stuff like that. And also like gimmicky foods. Like we did, Red Robin has released a Terminator Genesis burger. So we did that, and come to find out Terminators like jalapenos, I guess, because that's mostly what was on this. So that's a show we do too, but that's a total show where it's like, if we want to take a break from some other scripted series, then we do this Brad Tries show that totally doesn't take long at all.
So I want you to clear up a little rumor here. You know, before we started recording this, we talked about how, you know, we're both rocking the thinning hair, let's say, the goatee, this kind of stuff. Now, you and I obviously are not the same person, but are you and that guy with glasses, you're not the same person, are you?
No, I'm not that guy with the glasses.
Okay, just making sure.
I'm just one of several people on there who has thinning hair and glasses and a goatee.
So where can people go to find the Cinema Snob?
Well, you can find me over at thecinemasnob.com, and my videos are also embedded over on channelawesome.com too, and I do other videos on that site as well. But all of my main stuff is posted over at thecinemasnob.com.
Very cool. Well, thanks again, Brad, for coming on the show. It's been way too long in getting you on here, and we really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Dude, anytime. Thanks for inviting me.
So, what is your favorite Alien film? By you, I'm talking to you, audience. What is it and why? Go over and leave us some feedback over at our website, projection-booth.com. And, you know, if you've learned anything today, or if you've got any hate mail for us or any of that kind of stuff, we are craving your feedback. We're actually going to do another Ego show. This will be the third one. That's going to be, I want to say, end of August, early September. So you've got a few weeks to get us in your voicemails, send us your MP3s, send us your emails, those kind of things. I think the best email address to use is theguys@projection-booth.com. Send it on in. But if you've got some other feedback that you want to just leave immediately, go on over to iTunes. Let the world know what you think about the Projection Booth, and it will definitely help us in our quest for world domination.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.